Hey guys, tonight we slip through time and land in the middle of Tudor England. Cobblestone streets under your shoes, wooden beams leaning overhead, and an unmistakable stink that hits you before anything else. The air is thick with smoke from open hearths, manure from horses, and the tang of the Thames, which is more open sewer than scenic river. You wanted to stroll through history, but already you're holding your breath. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward and instantly feel how alive these streets are. The noise is relentless. Hawkers shouting the price of eels, women scolding children, dogs barking, the clatter of cartwheels over ruts. Church bells ring every quarter hour, echoing across wooden beams that seem to lean closer than they should, as if the houses on either side of the alley are conspiring to squeeze you out. London, in the mid-1500s, may have only 200,000 people, but the density feels suffocating, like all of Europe decided to pile onto this tiny square of land. You glance down and immediately regret it. The street is mud-churned with horse dung and refuse, slick and sticky in ways you don't even want to define. A bucket sloshes from a second-story window and splatters into the gutter near your feet. Someone above casually shouts, "Gardy Lou," a warning that you've just missed by seconds. Congratulations! You've been introduced to Tudor plumbing. Your modern sneakers wouldn't last half a block. Even leather boots are barely surviving the filth. One wrong slip, and you'll be baptized into a puddle no one would ever want to name. This isn't a romantic stroll through history. It's a sensory assault. Yet you can't help being fascinated. On one side, a fishmonger slaps cod onto a block, scales flying. On the other, a tanner scrapes hides. The stench of urine and dung used in curing animal skins overwhelming everything else. You thought you knew bad smells. Fast food trash in July, maybe? No. Tudor London is in another league. Jokingly, you wonder if Tudor candle makers ever considered bottling authentic city air as a scent. No takers, obviously. You dodge a group of apprentices carrying barrels, their coarse jokes echoing as they pass. Social hierarchy rules everything here. Nobles glide by in litters, their silks perfumed, while the poor bend under loads, barely noticed. You, with your strange clothes and awkward stares, belong nowhere. A woman frowns at your odd accent. A child tugs your sleeve, begging for a penny. Suspicion and curiosity follow you everywhere. Historians still argue whether Londoners were used to strangers or instantly wary of outsiders. But in this moment, you're sure it's the latter. The river draws you, but it's worse than you expected. The Thames is a brown soup clogged with dead dogs, dye waste from cloth makers, and human filth. And yet, it's vital, ferrying goods, feeding mills, and yes, supplying drinking water to those with no choice. The irony? People genuinely believe ale is healthier, and they're not wrong. Imagine hydration as an excuse to be mildly buzzed all day. Suddenly, your modern water bottle feels like a luxury worth its weight in gold. Your stomach growls as you pass bakers' shops. The smell of warm bread, a rare delight amid the stink. But even here, trouble lurks. Bakers can be fined for underweight loaves. and crooked scales are common in the markets. You wonder if it's safer to eat or starve. Then again, starvation is always near the poor in Tudor London. The food pyramid here is basically bread, ale, and pray you don't run out. You wander into a wider street where entertainment erupts. A jester-like man stands on a cart, mocking the latest proclamation. A crowd laughs, though some glance nervously. Mocking authority can turn deadly fast. At the edge of the crowd, a preacher bellows warnings of hellfire, waving a Bible. People argue loudly, faith and theater blurring together. You realize belief here isn't private. It's shouted, sung, and fought over in public squares. In fact, these same streets could host anything. Royal pageants with banners and music, or prisoners dragged in chains to their execution. Spectacle is part of daily life. The architecture catches your eye. Timber-framed houses painted with lime wash, their upper stories jutting so far over the road that neighbors could almost shake hands from upstairs windows. Many lean alarmingly, sagging under centuries of damp. Fires are constant threats. Everyone knows it takes just one careless ember and half a street could vanish. There's no fire brigade, no hydrants, just leather buckets and prayer. You look around for a street lamp, then laugh at yourself. Electricity is centuries away. At night, darkness swallows everything, and only candles or smoky rushlights pierce the black. You duck into a tavern to escape the bustle, but it's hardly better inside. Smoke chokes the rafters, tankards slam against wooden tables, dice roll, songs turn bawdy. You stand out immediately. Your posture, your silence. A drunk eyes you suspiciously, his grin missing more teeth than it shows. For a moment, you imagine him shouting "witch," and the whole room turning on you. And in this world, that accusation could very well be fatal. Joke number 2, your modern defense, "Hey guys, it's just cosplay," probably won't save you. Back outside, something softer catches you. A fiddler plays in the corner of a marketplace, children skipping in a ring around him. A mother buys cherries, the fruit bright against the grime. For just a moment, you feel the heartbeat of the city. Raw, noisy, filthy, but human. It's easy to forget that for Tudor Londoners, this isn't a grim museum exhibit. It's their ordinary Tuesday. They find laughter and rhythm amid the chaos. And then, as you brush past a cart, a rough voice snarls at you for being in the way. You stumble back, heart racing. Danger hums under every encounter. One wrong look, one wrong word, and you could end up in a brawl, or worse, in the stocks for disturbing the peace. It's exhausting to realize how thin the line is between surviving and being punished. By the time dusk begins to creep in, you're overwhelmed. Your eyes burn from smoke, your nose aches from stench, your ears ring with endless clamor. All you want is a shower, headphones, maybe even traffic noise. Anything but this medieval carnival of filth and fury. And yet, you've only passed a single day wandering the streets. Tomorrow morning, when you sit down for breakfast, you'll face your next trial. Spoiler. You won't like the menu. You wake to the sound of a cock crowing and realize that Tudor Britain does not recognize your love for snooze buttons. Morning is not optional. It drags you out of whatever scratchy bed or straw mat you've collapsed on. And before you can even think about coffee, which hasn't yet arrived in England, you're being handed the day's first meal. Spoiler. It's not bacon, eggs, and pancakes. It's not even cereal. It's bread. Just bread. The loaf before you is rough and brown, dense enough to double as a weapon. This is called maslin bread, a mix of wheat, rye, and whatever grain the miller managed not to lose to rats. If you're lucky, you get a chunk with a smear of cheese that tastes faintly of mold. And to drink? Ale. Always ale. Water is too risky. Remember the Thames stew you saw yesterday? So everyone from toddlers to grandmothers starts the day with small beer, a weak brew that won't kill you, but might keep you mildly buzzed all morning. Congratulations! You're now a breakfast drinker. You take a tentative sip. It's warm, flat, and vaguely sour. Not exactly the iced latte you crave. But here, ale is fuel, hydration, and medicine rolled into one. Some historians still argue whether the average Tudor was constantly tipsy or whether their tolerance was simply sky high. Either way, your head feels fuzzy after only a few gulps. Joke number 1. Welcome to the only diet plan where don't get cholera means drinking beer before noon. The bread chews like sawdust. You bite down and nearly crack a tooth on a stone fragment left from grinding grain at the mill. This is a common hazard. So common, in fact, that archaeologists studying Tudor skeletons often find worn or broken teeth from years of chewing grit. You wince and suddenly appreciate your dentist back home. Even with the bills around you, the smells of breakfast vary by class. The wealthy, if they even bother with an early meal, might nibble sweet rolls or sip wine. But for the poor majority, it's the same. Bread, ale, maybe porridge if oats are cheap. On rare days, you might get pottage, a thick stew of beans, peas, and whatever scraps survived yesterday's dinner. It simmers in a single pot, added to day after day until it resembles edible mud. In fact, the family cauldron was often never emptied, just replenished. Joke number 2. Imagine proudly saying you've been eating the same meal for 10 years, and meaning it literally. Someone hands you a slice of bread trencher, basically a flat hunk used as both plate and food. It's hard as wood, but by the end of a meal it soaks up meat juices, if there's any meat to soak. Usually it's just more broth or beans. Afterward, trenchers are sometimes given to the poor or to animals. In other words, your breakfast plate enjoys a second career as pig feed. You suddenly miss paper towels. Breakfast in Tudor England isn't about pleasure, it's about survival. Calories matter more than flavor, and while you grumble about the monotony, remember, this meal keeps you upright for hours of labor. Hunger stalks every household. Grain harvests are unreliable, and one bad season can mean famine. People stretch bread with peas, beans, or acorns if they must. Some even bake loaves bulked out with sawdust. Historians still debate whether such desperation bred actually nourished or slowly starved people. Either way, you're not eager to try. You glance around and notice differences in table manners. No forks here, just knives, spoons, and fingers. The idea of stabbing peas with a tiny spear won't catch on until later. And napkins? Forget it. People wipe hands on the tablecloth or more often on their sleeves. You hesitate to join in, but eventually you smear crumbs down your arm like everyone else. Congratulations! You've adopted authentic Tudor etiquette. Then there's salt. Everyone wants it, few can afford it. Salt preserves meat and flavors otherwise bland mush. If someone sprinkles a pinch on their bread, you know they're well off. You, meanwhile, lick your lips and pretend not to care. And sugar. Oh, sugar is rarer still, imported from far-off plantations. Rich Tudors display sugar sculptures at feasts to show wealth. For you, even a grain would feel like treasure. As you chew the last mouthful, you overhear the day's chatter. Rumors of plague in the next parish, a neighbor fined for selling underweight loaves, gossip about whether the Queen will visit the city. Meals double as news bulletins, since taverns and kitchens are where people trade stories. You feel the energy of a world buzzing with uncertainty, politics, and superstition. And one last detail, mealtime prayers. Food is considered a divine gift, however grim. Before and after, families bow their heads and give thanks. You join in awkwardly, not sure whether to cross yourself Catholic style or nod along Protestant style. Religion divides even the act of eating, and you can sense the tension. You mutter something vague and hope no one notices. By the time breakfast ends, your stomach is lined with beer, your teeth ache from bread grit, and your sleeve is greasy from wiping. And the real kicker? This is the easiest part of your day. Ahead lies endless labor, chores, crafts, and fields that will burn off every crumb you just consumed. For now, you pat your belly and try to convince yourself you're fueled for the morning. Joke number 3. If Tudor Britain had Yelp, breakfast would get 2 stars. Kept me alive, but would not recommend. The moment breakfast is done, you're expected to move. Not lounge, not scroll through a phone, not ease back into bed. Life in Tudor Britain doesn't allow lazy mornings. Survival depends on constant effort, and you quickly realize that every household chore here is a full-body workout. Forget the gym. You're about to discover why Tudor backs bent early and stayed hunched for life. Your first task? Water. There is no sink to turn, no tap to twist. You trudge outside carrying heavy wooden buckets, joining others on the road toward the nearest well or pump. The line forms quickly. Women, children, even elderly folk, all waiting their turn to draw up the icy liquid. The rope creaks, the bucket splashes, and when your arms finally lift it over the lip, you nearly tip over from the weight. 20 to 30 pounds per bucket, and you need several just to last the morning. No wonder children start carrying small pails as soon as they can walk. Historians still argue whether Tudor children developed strength faster out of necessity, but as your shoulders ache, you're leaning toward yes. Back at the house, you slosh the water into a large wooden tub. This isn't for bathing. Don't get any modern ideas. It's for cooking, brewing, or laundry. And laundry here is not a gentle cycle. Clothes are soaked in lye, scrubbed against boards, beaten with paddles, and wrung out by hand. The soap stings your skin, made from animal fat and ash, and leaves your fingers raw. A single shirt feels like a week's work. Jokingly, you think, maybe dirty clothes aren't so bad after all. Welcome to joke number 1. Once water duty is done, it's on to food preparation. The family's midday meal, the biggest of the day, requires grinding, chopping, and boiling long before noon. You're handed a heavy mortar and pestle to grind spices or grains. Without blenders or processors, everything is manual. You pound until your arms throb. Across the table, someone kneads bread dough, sweat dripping from their brow. The oven is a brick hearth, fed constantly with wood, and smoke thickens the air. You cough, eyes watering, while the others barely notice. Their lungs are hardened by years of smoke-filled kitchens. Yours are begging for an inhaler. In wealthier homes, apprentices and servants take on these chores, learning trades like brewing, weaving, or candle making. You're pulled toward a spinning wheel and told to twist wool into thread. The motion is hypnotic. Wheel turning, fibers pulling, but after a few minutes, your fingers blister. Producing cloth is the backbone of Tudor England's economy, but for you, it feels like an endless loop of try again, but worse. Joke number 2. If you ever complained about tangled earbuds, wait until you see wool fibers snarled around a wheel. Children, too, aren't spared from chores. They chase geese, collect eggs, gather firewood, or stand guard over boiling pots. Even toddlers carry small sticks of kindling. School is a privilege, not a guarantee, and most children grow up knowing work first and letters second. You glance at a boy hauling a basket twice his size and feel slightly ashamed of every time you groaned about taking the trash out back home. Then there's animal care. Chickens must be fed, cows milked, pigs slopped. You're handed a stool and told to try milking. It looks simple, but the cow has other plans. A swift kick nearly knocks the bucket over, and warm milk splashes your clothes. The others laugh, and so does the cow. You swear. You discover that even farm animals here have more skill than you. Joke number 3. You're officially losing a battle of wits to a cow. By late morning, you're exhausted. Your muscles burn, your hands sting, your clothes are damp with sweat. And this is just ordinary work. No plagues, no failed harvests, no sudden demands from a noble lord. You catch sight of your reflection in a pot. Smudged face, wild hair, grim expression. You've been in Tudor Britain less than a day and already look like you've aged 5 years. Still, amid the hardship, you notice something. Rhythm. Chores create a steady hum of life. Buckets sloshing, wheels spinning, animals lowing. Families and neighbors work side by side, chatting, gossiping, singing snatches of song. It's hard labor, but it's shared labor. In a strange way, it binds people together. The daily grind isn't about individual comfort. It's about collective survival. As the church bell tolls noon, signaling the hour of dinner, what we call lunch, you realize the morning's chores have chewed through every crumb of your breakfast. You're starving, sweaty, and stiff. And yet, this was considered just an ordinary start to a Tudor day. The real misery, and perhaps a little glamour, waits in what people wear. Your next challenge? Fashion. Scratchy, stifling, and sometimes deadly. You think the morning's chores were rough, but wait until you face Tudor fashion. The saying, "Clothes make the man," has never been truer, except here they also break your back, roast your body, and occasionally kill you. Welcome to the world of doublets, kirtles, and had enough wool to suffocate a sheep. First, you're handed your underlayer, the humble linen shirt or smock. It's scratchy, plain, and never fully clean, no matter how often it's washed. But it's your only defense against chafing from the layers that follow. You slip it on and immediately feel like you've donned sandpaper pajamas. Over this comes woolen hose, basically leggings, that sag around your knees. Elastic hasn't been invented, so you tie them up with cords. You glance in a smoky piece of polished metal, and yes, you look ridiculous. Now comes the doublet, a padded jacket laced tightly at the waist. Imagine wearing a medieval corset for men, snug, hot, and stiff. For women, the corset itself is real, stiffened with whalebone or reeds. It squeezes ribs until breathing becomes a luxury. The fashionable ideal is a narrow waist and rigid posture. You tug the laces and wonder if fashion designers across time are secretly in league to torture humanity. Joke number 1, you wanted snatched waist. What you got was snatched lung capacity. Over these basics come more layers: kirtles, gowns, jerkins, depending on your sex and class. Wool dominates everything, coarse for the poor, fine and dyed for the wealthy. Rich folks flaunt velvets, satins, and silks imported from abroad. But sumptuary laws, those strict rules of who can wear what, mean you'd better be careful. Wearing purple if you're not royalty? That's illegal. Gold thread without noble blood? Forbidden. Clothing isn't just fashion. It's law, a visible sign of your place in society. For women, headwear is mandatory. Married women cover their hair with linen coifs or hoods, while noble ladies display elaborate French hoods set with jewels. You're handed a coif, tie it under your chin, and feel like a toddler in a bonnet. Men, meanwhile, sport flat caps or tall hats, feathers bobbing for those who can afford it. The richer the hat, the higher the status. In fact, Henry VIII's wardrobe supposedly held over 200 hats. Because when you have absolute power, why not? And then there's footwear, leather shoes, pinch your toes, often stuffed with straw for warmth. Soles are thin, so every pebble jabs your foot. In winter, mud soaks through instantly, leaving you squelching all day. You suddenly appreciate your waterproof sneakers. Tudor London is basically a podiatrist's nightmare. But here's the thing. Clothes aren't just uncomfortable, they're dangerous. Women's skirts are long and heavy, easy to catch fire near open hearths. More than one Tudor woman literally went up in flames while cooking dinner. Perfumed gloves, popular among nobles, were sometimes treated with toxic chemicals that seeped into the skin. Even fashionable cosmetics could kill. Wealthy ladies dusted their faces with lead-based powders for a pale look. Joke number 2. Nothing says high class like slowly poisoning yourself for beauty. You catch sight of nobles parading in their finery, ruffs, those giant frilled collars, frame faces like lacy halos. They look impressive, but wearing one is like strapping on a starched neck brace. The richer the ruff, the more starch, and some grow so wide they need wire supports. You watch a young courtier try to sip ale and end up dripping it down his front. Even Tudor fashion can't resist slapstick comedy. And the poor, they don't escape discomfort. Their clothes may be simpler, but they're patched, threadbare, and never fully dry. Wool holds damp like a sponge, and without indoor heating, you often live in clothes that reek of smoke, sweat, and mildew. Laundry day doesn't happen often, so you might wear the same outfit for weeks. The term Sunday best comes from saving your least ragged set of clothes for church. You glance down at your outfit and realize you already look like someone's Monday worst. Historians still argue whether Tudor people felt fashion discomfort the way you do, or whether they were so used to rough fabrics that it barely registered. But for you, every seam scratches, every cord digs, and every step feels restricted. You long for elastic waistbands, cotton t-shirts, and a closet where you can actually breathe. By midday, sweat trickles under the layers. You tug at your collar, desperate for air, but the doublet holds you in place. You wonder how anyone managed farm labor or sword fighting dressed like this. The truth is, they suffered. Letters and records complain about heat rashes, lice infestations, and fainting in summer. Fashion here isn't about comfort. It's about broadcasting wealth, piety, or obedience. Your body is just collateral damage. And yet, in the middle of your misery, you glimpse the beauty. Sunlight hits a noble woman's embroidered gown, gold threads glittering. A merchant strides past in a bright red jerkin, proud of the dye that cost him a week's profits. Children laugh in their patched smocks, mud on their knees, joy undimmed by shabby hymns. Clothes here tell stories of rank, struggle, vanity, and survival. You just wish your story didn't involve sweating like a roast chicken in wool. As the afternoon bell tolls, you shuffle back toward your next ordeal. You itch, you stink, you can't breathe properly, and your feet ache. You thought Tudor fashion would make you look dashing. What it's really made you is miserable. And now, layered and overheated, you feel the first real question bubbling in your mind. How on earth do people stay clean in a world like this? The answer, of course, is they don't. The itch under your layers has turned unbearable, and it's only now that you realize what's missing in Tudor Britain: hygiene. You can wrap yourself in linen and wool all you like, but without soap, plumbing, or deodorant, you're essentially a walking compost heap. You glance around and wonder, how does anyone survive the smell of themselves, let alone the city? You start with the question of bathing. In your world, a shower takes 10 minutes and feels like magic. Here, it's a full ordeal. Water must be hauled, heated over a fire, and poured into a wooden tub. By the time the tub is filled, the water is lukewarm at best, and the whole house smells of smoke. And you don't get to bathe alone, not unless you're rich. Whole families often share the same bath water one after another, starting with the father and ending with the smallest child. By then, the water resembles a soup you wouldn't dare taste. Joke number 1. If you thought roommates borrowing your towel was bad, imagine them borrowing your entire bath. But here's the twist. Most people don't even bother. In Tudor England, regular bathing is rare. The common belief is that hot water opens your pores, letting disease seep into your body. Staying dirty, paradoxically, is thought to keep you healthy. Instead of scrubbing skin, people focus on clean linen, changing undergarments when possible. The linen rubs against the skin and supposedly wicks away filth. You tug at your scratchy smock and realize it's not a fashion statement. It's medieval hygiene technology. And then there's the bathroom situation. You're searching for a toilet, but good luck. In wealthy homes, you might find a garderobe, basically a stone or wooden bench with a hole leading to a cesspit. The smell wafts up the moment you sit. In poorer homes, the chamber pot rules. Everyone uses it, often in the same room where they eat and sleep. In the morning, someone dumps the contents into the street. You remember yesterday's shout of "Gardy-loo!" and shiver. Yes, that's human waste flying out the window. Welcome to urban sanitation. If you're in the fields, privacy means squatting behind a hedge. Rivers and ditches double as latrines. The Thames, already choking with refuse, receives more contributions daily. No wonder outbreaks of dysentery and cholera sweep the population. Historians still argue whether Tudor people connected their waste disposal habits with disease or if they chalked it up to bad air. Either way, your nose tells you something's horribly wrong. To cover the stink, people rely on perfumes, herbs, and pomanders, small metal balls filled with spices worn around the neck or tucked into clothes. Wealthy folks might carry a clove-studded orange, pressing it to their nose when the smell of London overwhelms. You don't have one, so you just gag in silence. Joke number 2. Imagine explaining to your friends that your signature scent is rotten fish mixed with sewage. And then there's the matter of teeth. Toothbrushes don't exist yet. Instead, people rub teeth with cloth, chew on twigs, or rinse with wine or vinegar. Wealthy women use powders made with crushed coral or pumice, which strip enamel faster than you can say, dentist appointment. Blackened teeth actually become fashionable later, when sugar consumption skyrockets. The irony? Rotting teeth are considered a status symbol, proof you can afford sweets. Joke number 3. Nothing screams high society like a mouth that looks like a chessboard missing half the pieces. Hair care is equally inventive. Lice are a fact of life, so shaving the head and wearing wigs becomes common among the upper classes. Wigs are powdered, perfumed, and sometimes crawling with more lice. The poor, meanwhile, just scratch. You feel your scalp crawl and resist the urge to check your own head. And skin? Well, good luck. Pimples, rashes, sores, all common. Remedies involve everything from rose water washes to applying fresh urine. Yes, urine. Some Tudor medical texts recommend it as a cleanser. You decide you'll stick with soap, thank you very much, even if it's centuries away. The most dangerous part of hygiene, though, is medicine. Surgeons and barbers often overlap in their duties. Yes, the same person who trims your beard might amputate your leg. They use unwashed tools, no anesthetic, and plenty of leeches. A small cut can turn fatal, and plague doctors roam with bird-like masks stuffed with herbs, hoping to ward off contagion. When you remember how casually you once sprayed hand sanitizer, you almost laugh. Almost. By midday, your nose is numb, your skin itches, and your stomach turns at every whiff of the street. Hygiene here isn't a daily routine. It's a desperate balancing act between smell, superstition, and survival. And as you try to steady yourself, a new sound cuts through the stink, the sharp crack of a cane against wood. Children wince under the stern gaze of a master. School, or the lack of it, is calling. You wander toward the tolling of a heavy bell, its bronze voice rolling across the crooked rooftops like a command. It's Sunday morning, and in Tudor England, that means there's really no choice in where your feet will carry you. The church is the center of community life, and attendance is not a suggestion. It's an expectation. If you skip, someone will notice, and someone else will report it. In this world, faith isn't private. It's public, almost theatrical. Step inside the parish church, and you feel the chill of stone walls pressing around you. Candles flicker in tall holders, smoke curling upward like whispered prayers. The air smells of wax, damp wood, and humanity packed shoulder to shoulder. Sermons roll out in English now, thanks to Henry VIII's break with Rome, but the echoes of Latin still cling to the ritual. You shuffle to your place, kneeling on the hard floor, and quickly realize that comfort was never part of the design. Religion in Tudor England is less about personal reflection and more about survival. One week, loyalty to the Pope might get you branded a traitor. The next, loyalty to the king could be heresy. The country swings back and forth between Catholic and Protestant, depending on who sits on the throne. Under Henry VIII, the church is nationalized. Under Edward VI, Protestant reforms rush in like a flood. Mary Thurm reverses it all, restoring Catholicism with fiery zeal. Then Elizabeth strikes her careful middle way, though even then suspicion lingers on anyone who doesn't conform. You, a hapless outsider, stand in the middle of this tug of war, terrified that the hymn you just mumbled might be judged treasonous by next year. A mainstream fact. The 1559 Act of Uniformity required everyone to attend services of the Church of England, with fines for absences. So if you thought you could fake a cough and stay in bed, think again. Joke number 1. You might survive the plague, but skipping Sunday service could bankrupt you faster than a London tavern bar tab. Yet it isn't all solemnity. Festivals and holy days dot the calendar, giving rhythm to the year. Candlemas, Corpus Christi, All Saints, each marked with processions, music, and community feasting. The rituals are colorful, theatrical even, blending the sacred with the festive. The boundaries between old pagan customs and Christian ones blur. People still light bonfires on Midsummer's Eve or leave offerings for spirits at harvest, just in case. Historians still argue whether these practices were tolerated remnants of older religions or cleverly Christianized traditions. Either way, superstition thrives, filling the gaps where official doctrine leaves questions unanswered. At the center of worship stands the priest. His words hold enormous weight, not just in spiritual matters, but in everyday disputes. He reads the banns of marriage, warns against immoral behavior, and sometimes delivers thinly veiled political messages straight from the crown. Sermons can be an hour long, and you sit on rough benches trying to focus while your stomach growls. Joke number 2. Somewhere in the back, a farmer is definitely snoring, proving that boredom is a sin no preacher can conquer. For the wealthy, worship is a display of status. Families sponsor stained glass windows, carved pews, or rich vestments to demonstrate both piety and power. The poor, meanwhile, clutch rosaries or prayer books if they can afford them, or just follow along by heart. Literacy is rare, but memorization is strong. You hear prayers repeated with the steady rhythm of generations, the fringe tidbit. Some tutors believed certain relics or charms carried holy protection, though reformers mocked these as superstitions. A bone fragment said to be from a saint might draw pilgrims, bringing coin to a parish. Others wore amulets with scraps of scripture to ward off illness or witchcraft. Even when the official church frowned, ordinary people hedged their bets. Why not, when death lurked in every corner? And that's another truth. You're never far from death here. Infant mortality, plague, sweating sickness, famine, each casts its shadow, and religion offers the only comfort. Funeral rites, masses for the dead, prayers for the soul in purgatory, or for Protestants, a briefer, more austere goodbye, help people make sense of loss. You picture the tolling bell calling out not just for worship, but for constant reminders that life is fleeting. The architecture itself preaches. Towering spires point heavenward, stained glass floods the nave with jewel-colored light, and carved angels peer down from beams. Even if you don't understand the theology, the building tells you this is sacred space. It's meant to awe, to humble, to bind the community together. But religion here isn't only about belief, it's also about control. The state watches for recusants, those who refuse to conform, and punishes harshly. Neighbors spy on each other. Whispers of secret Catholic masses or underground Protestant gatherings circulate. One wrong word, one slip of loyalty, and you could end up imprisoned or worse. Joke number 3. In Tudor England, pray carefully isn't just spiritual advice. It's a survival strategy. Still, Worship provides genuine comfort. Hymns echoing in stone vaults, the rhythm of kneeling and standing, the shared muttering of familiar prayers, these bind you to the people around you. The service is long, sometimes tedious, but it's also a break from toil, a chance to see neighbors, exchange gossip, and share in a collective identity. As you step out of the church into daylight, you notice the crowd spilling back into the streets. The bell falls silent, replaced by chatter, laughter, and the shuffle of boots on dirt. For a moment, the tension between faith and fear eases. Life goes on, the market reopens, and musicians begin to tune their lutes. The world shifts once more, from incense and stone to laughter and song. And you, caught in the tide, are swept toward the next great thread of Tudor life, the music that fills both palace and tavern, binding joy and rebellion into melody. The sound finds you before you even see the players. A few plucked strings, a whistle of a wooden flute, the low thrum of a drum. It drifts through the narrow lanes like a promise of escape. Tudor England may be harsh, but it has one saving grace. Music is everywhere. You follow the notes and stumble into a small square where townsfolk have gathered. Some sway gently, others clap, and a handful attempt clumsy dance steps on the uneven cobblestones. Music isn't background noise here. It's stitched into the fabric of daily life. At court, lutes and virginals, a keyboard cousin of the harpsichord, accompany elaborate dances, with courtiers bowing and spinning in stiff but elegant patterns. In taverns, rougher instruments take over, fiddles, bagpipes, and tambourines. The songs are bawdy, the rhythms fast, the jokes hidden in lyrics sharper than the ale. Joke number 1. You quickly discover Tudor drinking songs are the Spotify playlists of their time, except you can't skip a track, and the volume controls just more beer. A mainstream fact, Henry VIII himself was a composer and musician, writing pieces like Pastime with Good Company. The king could play multiple instruments, and courtiers were expected to at least fake musical talent to keep up. Imagine your boss today demanding you sing harmonies at the staff meeting or else. No pressure. But music isn't confined to the elite. Ordinary folk hum ballads while churning butter, whistle while tending sheep, and sing while trudging through endless labor. Songs carry news and gossip, functioning like musical newspapers. If you miss a royal proclamation, don't worry. Some minstrel will belt out a ballad about it by week's end. Historians still argue whether these ballads shaped public opinion or merely reflected it. But either way, they spread like wildfire. And then there are the dances, galliards, pavans, branles, each with its own steps, some light and springy, others stately and controlled. You try to join in, only to discover that Tudor dance floors are basically gyms disguised as social events. After 2 minutes of leaping galliard kicks, your thighs burn. Joke number 2. Suddenly, you realize why no one in Tudor portrait smiles. They're all too exhausted from dancing. Festivals and fairs amplify the merriment. Traveling musicians set up in markets, acrobats tumble through the crowds, and jugglers toss brightly colored balls. Music here isn't just entertainment, it's survival. It lifts weary spirits, distracts from hunger, and softens the sting of endless labor. Even in plague years, when death carts roll through the streets, fiddles still scrape out tunes, as if defying despair. The fringe tidbit: Some tutors believed certain songs carried magical power. A lullaby could soothe not only a child, but also ward off evil spirits. Certain rhythms were thought to heal headaches, while a badly played bagpipe might be blamed for souring milk. Even Shakespeare, who lived through this world, salted his plays with jokes about music's mysterious pull. You notice, too, that music isn't only sound, it's performance. A noble might display a finely crafted lute inlaid with ivory as a status symbol, much as someone today might show off the latest smartphone. Meanwhile, traveling players survive on tips, their ragged clothes telling of hard miles. One musician plays so passionately that a string snaps, whipping across his knuckles. He doesn't flinch, just keeps strumming, sweat shining on his brow. Yet, music can be dangerous. Certain songs are politically loaded, praising one monarch while mocking another. Sing the wrong tune in the wrong company, and you could find yourself accused of treason. Ballads are policed almost as strictly as sermons. Still, the melodies survive, slipping into memory where no law can reach. Inside grand halls, you witness consorts of viols and flutes filling the air with complex harmonies. Nobles step in time, their stiff brocaded outfits rustling with each movement. At the same moment across town, peasants stomp their boots to the rhythm of a drum, hands linked in a circle dance that's half ritual, half rebellion. High and low, rich and poor, music unites them all, if only for a few precious minutes. Joke number 3. The one thing everyone agrees on is that bagpipes are loud, too loud. You suspect entire villages join dances not for joy, but just to drown out the endless drone. As twilight falls, torches flare, shadows stretch, and the music quickens. People dance harder, drink deeper, and laugh louder. You find yourself swept into the circle, clapping, spinning, breathless. For a moment, the harshness of Tudor life dissolves. Hunger, plague, politics, all fade under the spell of melody. But just as the final note lingers in the air, the crowd begins to break apart, faces turning serious again. Tomorrow means labor, duty, and the grind of survival. You wipe sweat from your brow, realizing that in this world, merriment is precious, precisely because it is fleeting. The laughter echoes in your ears as you stumble toward the next part of your Tudor trial, the family home where even rest is its own challenge. You leave the fading music behind, but instead of peace, you step into the cramped world of Tudor family life. Forget your idea of home sweet home. Here, a home is less a private sanctuary and more a hive, buzzing, crowded, and relentlessly hierarchical. You push open a low wooden door and duck into a room where smoke clings stubbornly to the rafters. A hearth burns dimly, though most of the warmth seems to escape through the gaps in the walls. The smell hits you first. Wood smoke, unwashed clothes, a hint of livestock, and something you really hope is stew. Inside, 3 generations squeeze into the space. Parents, children, and sometimes grandparents all sleep, eat, and argue together. Privacy? Forget it. You're lucky if you have your own corner of straw. Marriage in Tudor England isn't a fairy tale romance. It's a contract. For the lower classes, it often comes down to practicality. A young woman marries to secure help in the fields or an extra pair of hands at the loom. For the gentry and nobility, alliances and land dictate matches. Love sometimes sneaks in through the back door, but it rarely signs the marriage papers. A mainstream fact: The average age for marriage was surprisingly late compared to the stereotype. Many men wed in their late 20s, women in their early to mid-20s, after saving enough to start a household. So no, 13-year-old brides weren't the everyday norm for common folk, though noble families sometimes hurried their daughters into alliances like auction lots. You notice children everywhere, but don't let their little wooden toys fool you. Childhood here is short. By age 7, many are already working, herding animals, spinning thread, fetching water, or learning a trade. Joke number 1. If you thought today's kids with summer jobs had it rough, imagine being sent to guard pigs in the rain with wolves lurking nearby. No take your child to work day, just take your child to work life. The father rules the household, his word treated like law. The mother works constantly, brewing ale, baking bread, sewing, teaching, disciplining, and somehow still nursing infants while managing older children. It's exhausting to watch, let alone live. If a husband dies, the widow may step in to manage affairs. But remarriage is often expected. Families are both survival units and mini dynasties, whether in a humble village or a manor house. And then there's discipline. Spare the rod? Not here. Children are expected to obey without question. A quick cuff to the ear or harsher punishments are common, believed to instill obedience. Scholars still argue whether Tudor families were unusually harsh or simply practical in shaping kids for a hard world. But family life isn't only stern rules. Gatherings around the hearth include storytelling, riddles, and even songs, little echoes of joy after days of endless toil. You might hear ballads about Robin Hood or Arthurian knights, or tales about saints and tricksters. Laughter bubbles up, though quickly hushed if the father scowls. Fringe tidbit. Some Tudor households nailed horseshoes over their doors not only for luck, but also to ward off witches, fearing a stray curse could spoil their food or make children sick. If you're noble, the domestic scene looks different, but comes with its own stresses. Marriages are chess moves on a board of power. Noble daughters may be shipped off to marry men they've never met, sometimes across countries. Dowries, the goods and money a bride brings, determine her worth. A rich dowry could mean a better match, but also heavier expectations. And noble sons, groomed for politics, land management, or military careers. If you're a second or third son, you might end up in the church, whether you like it or not. Joke number 2. Imagine trying to argue with your Tudor parents that you'd rather be a YouTuber than a monk. It wouldn't end well. In townhouses, apprentices live with their masters, often treated as part of the family, though usually at the bottom of the pecking order. They learn trades while also fetching water, sweeping floors, and enduring the occasional scolding. Some grow into respected craftsmen. Others run away, joining traveling players or soldiers. The line between family and workplace blurs until it practically disappears. Marriage ceremonies themselves are community affairs. A church blessing marks the union, followed by feasts that could last for days, depending on wealth. Even the poorest try to celebrate with ale, bread, and music. At noble weddings, the displays are extravagant, with silk gowns, pageantry, and feasting on swans or peacocks. Historians still debate whether peasants resented these spectacles or secretly enjoyed sneaking glimpses, living vicariously through aristocratic glamour. But it isn't all merriment. The high infant mortality rate shadows every family. Mothers bear many children, knowing some won't survive. When a baby does live past early childhood, it's celebrated with relief, almost defiance. Cradles are rocked not just with lullabies, but with whispered prayers. You realize quickly that every laugh around the hearth is hard-won, balanced against the constant specter of loss. As night falls, everyone settles in. You're squeezed onto straw bedding, itchy and drafty. Chickens roost overhead in the rafters, scratching now and then. Someone snores loudly, a baby cries, and a parent shushes it with a weary hum. Joke number 3. You thought modern family holidays were crowded, but in Tudor Britain, every night is like stuffing 12 relatives into a one-bedroom Airbnb. Lying there, you reflect that family is both burden and lifeline. In a society where survival depends on numbers and labor, kinship ties matter more than personal freedom. You can't escape your family, but without them, you wouldn't last a week. Morning will come too soon, dragging you into another round of labor, learning, and obligation. For now, you close your eyes in the smoky dark, knowing your Tudor family is both your shield and your cage. You wake to the chiming of bells, not the kind you expect to wake you gently, but a clamor that seems to shake the whole village. They toll from the church tower, summoning everyone, whether they want to go or not. In Tudor England, faith isn't just personal belief. It's survival. Religion saturates every corner of your day. It tells you when to fast, when to feast, when to rest, and even when to marry. And if you get it wrong, well, let's just say you might find yourself on the wrong side of the law and the bonfire. The first thing you notice is how unavoidable the church is. No matter where you live, the spire dominates the skyline. Inside, the walls are bright with painted saints, or, depending on the decade, stripped bare by royal decree. That's the tricky part. Tudor faith isn't stable. The monarch sets the tone, and your soul, and possibly your neck, depend on keeping up. Under Henry VIII, Catholicism gets the axe when he breaks from Rome to found the Church of England. Under his son Edward VI, Protestant reforms accelerate, smashing stained glass and banning icons. Then Mary I swoops in, swinging the pendulum back, burning Protestants as heretics. Elizabeth Racière steadies the seesaw with her middle way, but even then, suspicion simmers. Historians still argue whether ordinary people truly cared about these shifts or simply pretended to, quietly muttering their own prayers behind closed doors. You shuffle into the pews, squeeze between neighbors who are all keenly aware of each other's loyalty. Attend Mass, or later services, and you show you're one of us. Miss too many, and whispers spread. One mainstream fact: fines for skipping church, known as recusancy, could ruin a family. For richer Catholics under Elizabeth, the constant pressure to conform or pay was like bleeding money into the royal coffers. The rituals themselves overwhelm you. Latin murmured by priests, incense curling in the rafters, chants filling the air. Then suddenly, everything changes. English replaces Latin, new prayer books arrive, and altars vanish. Imagine waking up one Sunday to find your entire worship style outlawed overnight. Joke number 1. It's like updating your phone and realizing your entire music playlist has disappeared. Except instead of being mildly annoyed, you could be executed for resisting. Faith isn't only about Sunday obligations. It controls your calendar. Holy days mark the rhythm of life, with long processions, fasting seasons, and saint festivals. Even plowing fields or brewing ale is measured against the church year. Parish priests wield huge influence. They baptize you, marry you, bury you, and remind you constantly that heaven and hell wait beyond the grave. But here's the danger. Religion isn't just faith, it's politics. Aligning yourself with the wrong faction can end in disaster. Speak too loudly about the Pope when Henry's in charge and you're accused of treason. Criticize Elizabeth's Protestant settlement and you might rot in the Tower. People swap whispered rumors like contraband, uncertain who might report them. Fringe tidbit. In some villages, locals believed mysterious misfortunes, like cows refusing to give milk, were caused by secret Catholics or witches meddling with faith. So yes, your dairy supply could become a religious battleground. You glance at the pulpit. The preacher is fiery, railing against sin, warning of eternal flames. Tudor sermons' last hours in pews are hard. Children fidget, adults drift off, but you can't ignore the constant refrain. Your eternal soul is at stake, and the fear isn't abstract. Execution for heresy is brutally public. Burnings staged in marketplaces meant to terrify everyone into obedience. Joke number 2. You think your worst public humiliation was mispronouncing a word in class. Here, the stakes are more blazing inferno in front of your neighbors. What complicates everything is how personal belief collides with survival. A devout Catholic might secretly keep rosary beads hidden in a drawer, whispering Hail Marys after dark. A staunch Protestant might burn with righteous anger at idolatry, eager to smash images of saints. Families can split along these lines, creating tensions at dinner that make your awkward family holidays seem tame. Scholars still debate whether the average Tudor truly believed in these ideological divides or simply obeyed to keep bread on the table. Religion also shapes education. Boys, and sometimes girls, learn to read by memorizing prayers. The alphabet itself might be taught using religious texts. And while some scholars encourage reform and translation of the Bible into English, others fear that common folk reading Scripture for themselves will unravel the delicate threads of order. On feast days, faith takes a lighter turn. Plays depict biblical scenes in town squares, with devils leaping and angels glowing in torchlight. Crowds cheer, children gape, and peddlers sell roasted nuts. For a moment, religion feels more carnival than commandment. Yet even these performances can come under scrutiny if they smack of the wrong theology. Fringe detail. In some plays, actors wore real animal bladders under costumes, so when the devil was stabbed, the bladder would burst with blood for shock value. Yes, even Tudor religion had special effects. And then there are the monasteries, or rather, their ruins. After Henry's dissolution, once bustling abbeys crumble, their lands seized by nobles. Villagers mourn the loss of charity. Monks had offered food, medical care, and education. Now, beggars roam more freely, and hospitals attached to monasteries vanish. You see firsthand how spiritual reform translates into empty stomachs and sicker children. Joke number 3. Imagine trying to explain to a Tudor monk that in your time, monasteries are tourist attractions with coffee shops attached. They'd probably faint into their habits. As evening falls, you feel the weight of it. Every step you take, every word you mutter, could be interpreted as faith or heresy. You're expected to navigate not just spiritual devotion, but political tightropes. To survive, you must smile, nod, attend the right services, and keep your doubts buried deep. One misstep, one overheard remark, and your neighbors might watch you burn. You curl into your straw bed, the bells still echoing faintly in your ears. Faith in Tudor Britain isn't just hope. It's a weapon, a leash, and sometimes the very noose around your neck. The day begins with the same gray light and the roosters crow. But instead of heading for the fields or the church, you're bundled into a small, drafty room with benches, slates, and the smell of ink. Congratulations! You're off to a Tudor school. Well, at least if you're lucky enough. Most children never see a classroom. They learn their trade by doing, not by scribbling letters. But you, for today, are being thrown headlong into the world of Tudor learning. The school isn't what you expect. Forget bright posters, pencil cases, or even desks. You perch on a wooden bench with other children, shuffling nervously while the schoolmaster glares from the front. His weapon of choice? Not a laser pointer or whiteboard marker, but a cane. Education here is a cocktail of Latin, fear, and sore knuckles. Latin dominates everything. Even if you don't understand a word, you're expected to chant prayers, psalms, and grammar drills in a language that feels like tongue-twisting riddles. The most basic book is Lily's Latin Grammar, approved by Henry VIII himself, and it's recited so often that some boys can quote chunks of it in their sleep. Joke number 1. You struggle enough memorizing song lyrics. Imagine if forgetting the chorus earned you a beating with a stick. The schoolmaster is relentless. He believes discipline molds character, so mistakes aren't just corrected, they're punished. Slates are smudged with chalk, inky fingers stained from clumsy attempts at writing, and the air fills with the steady drone of repetition. For wealthier boys, this misery is the first step toward university, and perhaps a career in law, the church, or royal service. For poorer children, school, if it happens at all, might end at reading the Psalter and being able to sign your name. Girls, unless born into noble families, rarely attend. Their curriculum is more likely spinning, sewing, and managing a household. What shocks you most is how literacy isn't just a skill. It's a mark of status. Many adults can't read at all, relying on memory, oral tradition, or symbols. That's why signs on taverns are painted with pictures: a swan, a crown, a barrel of ale. So even the illiterate know where to drink. Owning a book, even a single one, is a luxury. Printing presses are spreading after Gutenberg's invention, but books are still precious. In the corner, a few lucky students puzzle over arithmetic. Merchants need numbers to tally accounts and measure cloth. But beyond that, math isn't much of a priority. What matters most is faith. Religious texts are the foundation of schooling, which means the Bible is both your dictionary and your moral compass. Memorize verses, repeat prayers, and copy passages until your wrist cramps. Education and salvation blur into one. Fringe detail. There are curious stories of children taught to read using horn books, flat wooden paddles covered with a sheet of parchment, protected by a thin slice of transparent cow horn. On it, the alphabet, Lord's Prayer, and basic syllables are printed. Imagine your iPad, except it's a plank of wood with a prayer glued on top. The punishments are legendary. Whisper too loudly, slip in your recitation, or forget your declensions, and the rod comes down. The idea is simple. Beat the sin of sloth right out of you. Sometimes boys are made to wear dunce caps. pointed paper hats marking them as slow learners. The humiliation stings almost more than the cane. Joke number 2. It's the Tudor equivalent of being called on in class when you definitely didn't do the homework. Except here, the consequence isn't awkward silence, it's a welt across your hand. Still, not all is misery. For some, education unlocks dazzling new worlds. Imagine encountering the works of Cicero, Ovid, or Plato for the first time. Their ideas flowing into Tudor England through translations and commentaries. Humanist scholars like Erasmus and Thomas More push for broader learning, believing that education refines the soul and strengthens morality. In noble households, tutors introduce children to music, dance, history, and even astronomy. Some girls, like Elizabeth Forrest, receive astonishingly thorough educations, mastering multiple languages and political philosophy. But for most ordinary children, school is brief, if it happens at all. By 7 or 8, you might already be apprenticed to a trade, your classroom the workshop, your blackboard a pile of tools. Learning continues, but through observation, repetition, and grueling practice. A butcher's boy learns to sharpen knives, a blacksmith's lad to hammer iron, and a brewer's apprentice to stir bubbling vats. Education is also inseparable from morality. Teachers warn that laziness leads to sin, and reading scripture keeps you righteous. Lessons are as much about shaping obedient subjects as about passing knowledge. A good pupil is quiet, humble, and devout. 3 things you are definitely not, especially as you shift uncomfortably on the bench. Fringe tidbit. Some teachers relied on rhymes to drill lessons into memory. For example, mnemonic verses for grammar rules or moral couplets for behavior. In an age without easy access to books, singing knowledge into your head was the Tudor version of downloading files. By midday, your head throbs from chanting Latin and your fingers ache from cramped letters. You glance longingly at the door, wishing for recess. But recess isn't a thing yet, though sometimes boys kick a ball of leather in the yard, playing a chaotic version of football that often ends in bruises. Joke number 3. You thought your school PE class was rough, but at least no one came home with missing teeth after a friendly match. As you stumble out at the end of the day, one thing is clear. Tudor education is as much about control as it is about learning. Knowledge is a privilege, not a right, and it's always laced with fear. You're grateful to escape, but deep down, you realize something. Even through the cane strikes, the chanting, and the rigid rules, there's a spark here. The recognition that words, once unlocked, have power. And in Tudor England, power is always dangerous. The smell of hay, dung, and damp earth greets you before your eyes are even open. No schoolroom for you today. This time, you're hauled out of bed before the cock crows, bundled into rough woolens and shoved toward the fields. Life in Tudor England doesn't pause for a late sleeper. Agriculture is the backbone of everything, and if you want to eat, you work. You trudge along a dirt path, the mud sucking at your shoes as the sun barely hints over the horizon. A cluster of villagers already gathers, tools slung across their shoulders, scythes, hoes, and rakes. Men, women, and even children are expected to contribute. You quickly realize this isn't a part-time chore, it's life itself. The land is divided into strips. Each family tends long, narrow rows that look like ribbons of green and brown. Open field farming dominates. No neat fences, just communal lands where everyone knows which piece is theirs. The rhythm of the year controls everything, plowing in autumn, sowing in spring, harvesting in summer, and endless weeding, threshing, and storing in between. Miss one season, and you risk starvation. Joke number 1, suddenly skipping breakfast doesn't feel so dramatic, does it? You're handed a flail to thresh grain, and almost immediately your arms ache. The work is relentless, beating the husks until kernels spill out, each swing raising dust that clings to your face and stings your throat. Your back protests after minutes, yet the villagers carry on for hours, humming simple tunes to keep the rhythm. It dawns on you, in Tudor times, fitness wasn't an app. It was survival. The main crops are wheat, barley, rye, and oats. Bread is the staple, though not the soft white loaf you're used to. Poorer folks eat maslin, a coarse mix of grains that's dense, dark, and hard on the teeth. For drink, ale brewed from barley is safer than water, which is often contaminated. Children sip it too, though at a much weaker strength. Historians still argue whether the alcohol levels were truly enough to intoxicate or simply to disinfect. Either way, your morning beverage is a cloudy mug of ale that tastes somewhere between sour bread and wet hay. Cheers. Livestock roams the common fields. Pigs snuffle in the muck, sheep bleat constantly, and cattle chew lazily. Every family depends on these animals. Meat, milk, wool, and leather. You quickly learn that animals aren't pets. They're property, and their lives are carefully counted against your survival. Fringe detail. It was common to let pigs roam free in town streets, rooting through garbage. Imagine walking downtown and dodging a herd of muddy swine on your way to the market. The village works together, but not without tension. Strip farming means your row lies beside your neighbors, and disputes over boundaries, stolen sheaves, or wandering livestock are common. The manor court often has to settle these squabbles, usually in favor of the wealthier tenant. The lord of the manor owns the land, and villagers owe him rent or labor, sometimes called boon work. For you, that means not only tending your own family's plot, but also slogging through long days on the Lord's domain fields. Free time, that's a myth. Seasonal festivals punctuate the drudgery. At harvest's end, villagers celebrate with ale, music, and dancing, because finishing the harvest literally means surviving another year. A sheaf of wheat might be fashioned into a corn doll, a symbolic spirit of the crop, and saved until spring to bless the next planting. Superstition runs deep. A bad harvest isn't just misfortune, it might be blamed on witchcraft, divine anger, or a neighbor's jealousy. The tools you handle are primitive but effective. Wooden plows tipped with iron, heavy sickles for reaping, and flails for threshing. Your hands blister quickly, your shoulders burn, and yet the work is never ending. Joke number 2. You suddenly realize your gym membership would be redundant here. Everyone's got a six-pack, but it's from hauling hay bales, not crunches. The diet reflects the fields. Bread forms the base of almost every meal, supplemented with pottage, a thick stew of grains, beans, and vegetables. Meat is rare, usually eaten on feast days. Cheese, butter, and eggs fill the gaps when available. Herbs like parsley, sage, and thyme flavor dishes, though salt is precious. A rabbit snared in the woods is a welcome treat, though poaching risks punishment. Fringe tidbit. Sometimes villagers bake hedgehog pies, not made of hedgehog, thankfully, but shaped like one, with almonds for spines. Food was practical, but also playful, especially during celebrations. As the sun climbs, sweat soaks your back, and your skin prickles from the heat. You swat at flies while bending endlessly to pull weeds. Children as young as 5 shoo birds from the crops or collect kindling. There's no childhood bubble here. Everyone labors. Yet laughter still echoes across the fields. People sing, swap gossip, and tease each other. Work is crushing, but it's also shared. Historians still argue whether Tudor peasants were miserable serfs or relatively content in their tight-knit communities. The truth likely lies between. Poverty is everywhere, but so is resilience. You notice the pride in a freshly stacked hayrick, the relief in a cellar filled with grain sacks, the joy when a calf is born healthy. Life is harsh, but it is deeply connected to nature's rhythms, something modern life often hides. By dusk, you're bone-tired, your body aching in places you didn't know existed. Smoke curls from cottage chimneys, and the smell of pottage drifts across the village. Everyone eats quickly, then collapses onto straw mattresses, ready to rise before dawn and do it all over again. Joke number 3. When someone says they work 9 to 5, Tudor villagers would laugh. Your shift runs from sunrise to sunset, with overtime guaranteed. As you lay down, the fields still in your mind, you realize here life isn't a sprint or even a marathon. It's a cycle, relentless and eternal, dictated by the soil, the seasons, and the will to survive. You wouldn't last a day without collapsing, but somehow Tudor villagers endured for a lifetime. Morning sunlight slants through the cracks in the shutters, and before you can roll over, you're tugged from bed. No fields today. Something more delicate awaits you, the rhythm of a Tudor household, where even domestic work is grueling. You think you've escaped threshing wheat, but this is its own battlefield. The kitchen, smoky and warm, is already alive. A fire roars in the great hearth, spitting sparks as a girl your age turns a spit with a lump of meat skewered on it. She looks like she's been at it for hours already, cheeks red, eyes watering from the smoke. Joke number 1. So much for your fancy air fryer. This is manual spit rotation cardio. You're assigned chores immediately. Fetch water, you're told. Simple? Hardly. The well is at the edge of the village, and buckets are heavy even before they're filled. By the time you lug them back, your arms tremble. Water is precious and must be managed carefully for cooking, cleaning, brewing, and washing. Forget about long, hot showers. You'd be lucky to wipe down with a damp cloth once in a while. Historians still argue whether most Tudors were truly filthy or whether they practiced more quiet hygiene than records suggest. But either way, the concept of daily showering is laughable. The house itself is half workshop, half storage. Men weave baskets or mend tools. Women spin wool, weave linen, or make candles. Children scurry about, feeding chickens or gathering herbs. Everyone works together in this hive of necessity. Idle hands aren't just frowned upon, they're dangerous, because laziness could tip the balance toward hunger. You're handed wool and shown how to card it, dragging tufts across spiky paddles to straighten the fibers. It seems simple until your fingers ache and the wool stubbornly clumps. From there, spinning turns fluff into thread, winding endlessly on a spindle. Hours slip by, your back stiff, your patience thinning. Suddenly, that sweater in your closet seems worth 10 times its price. Cooking is another endless cycle. Bread must be baked daily unless you're wealthy enough to buy from a baker. The dough is heavy, the oven temperamental, and if you misjudge the fire, the loaf burns black. Stews simmer for hours, flavored with whatever scraps are available. Meat is rare. Fish, beans, cabbage, and onions are far more common. Fringe detail: some Tudors flavored their ale with odd herbs like bog myrtle or horehound, which sounds more like a witch's brew than dinner. Children are never idle. Girls as young as 7 are expected to master spinning and sewing. Boys chop wood or herd animals. If you're a servant in a wealthier home, your tasks are endless and tightly managed. Up at dawn, no rest until nightfall could be the Tudor family motto. Even playtime often doubles as work. Small children sing songs while shelling peas or collecting eggs. And then comes laundry day. Forget washing machines. Clothes are soaked in lye made from ashes and water, beaten with paddles, and scrubbed until your knuckles bleed. Bleaching is done by spreading linens on grass under the sun. The smell is sharp, your hands sting, and your back bends endlessly. Joke number 2. If you ever thought folding laundry was a pain, imagine thrashing your socks with a wooden bat for an afternoon. The house itself doesn't help. Smoke clings to everything. Chimneys are rare in poorer homes, so soot blackens the beams. Rushes on the floor grow dirty quickly, mixed with scraps of food and animal droppings. Fleas and lice are constant companions. Cats and dogs wander in, pigs sometimes too, and you suddenly understand why Tudor homes often smelled, let's call it, earthy. Superstition runs through daily chores. A crooked loaf of bread might be seen as bad luck. A chicken that crows at the wrong time could signal death. Herbs hang from beams, not just for seasoning, but to ward off evil spirits. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were genuinely believed or just cultural habits. But in your tired state, you're not inclined to test them. And then there's child rearing itself. Babies are swaddled tightly, bound in strips of cloth for months at a time. Some scholars think this protected them. Others say it was unhealthy. Either way, infants are carried into the fields or propped near the hearth while mothers work. Children are miniature adults, expected to obey, work, and survive. You, dropped into this world, feel years younger and utterly unprepared. Meals come as a communal event, and hierarchy rules even the table. Men eat first, women and children later. Servants eat what's left, often the worst cuts or the plainest pottage. You sneak a glance at your wooden trencher, a slab that doubles as a plate, soaking with stew. Your spoon is wood, your knife is personal, and forks are rare luxuries. You slurp carefully because spilling means wasting, and wasting is unthinkable. After dinner, more work. Flax is readied for linen, wool spun, candles dipped. The house buzzes with quiet activity until darkness forces everyone to bed. Candles are costly. You work by firelight or moonlight when possible. Your body sags with fatigue, but there's no relax on the couch with Netflix. Joke number 3. The only binge watching here is staring at flames for hours until your eyes blur. Fringe detail. Sometimes, instead of candles, families used rush lights. Strips of rush plants dipped in fat, which burned poorly, stank, and smoked. Imagine your room lit by a sputtering, greasy torch that threatens to go out at any second. As you collapse into your straw mattress again, it strikes you. Domestic life in Tudor England isn't a quiet background to history. It's a non-stop grind that keeps the world running. From the bread on the table to the shirt on your back, every item takes hours, days, or weeks of labor. And you? You wouldn't last past lunchtime without begging for an electric kettle, a washing machine, and maybe a can of Febreze. The rooster crows again, though you swear you only just closed your eyes. But there's no ignoring it. Today is market day, and that means leaving the village behind and stepping into the bustling heart of Tudor trade. You shake off the straw clinging to your tunic, and before long, you're trailing behind the steady flow of people carrying baskets, sacks, or sometimes even live animals. The road to the nearest market town is muddy, uneven, and alive with sound. Carts creak, chickens squawk, and someone's goat decides to bolt straight into your path. You narrowly avoid being trampled, and joke number one, so much for your relaxing farm-to-table experience. This farm wants you under the table. As the town gate comes into view, the atmosphere thickens. The air carries a stew of smells: roasting meat, fish laid out on stalls, fresh bread, unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of leather. The market square itself is an explosion of color and chaos. Merchants shout, trying to outdo one another. A cloth seller waves a bolt of bright red wool under your nose, promising it came straight from Flanders. A fishmonger slaps down a wriggling eel with such force you nearly jump out of your skin. Money, however, is tricky here. Many trades are still done by barter. You hand over eggs in exchange for onions, or a chicken for a small hunk of cheese. Coins exist, of course, groats, halfpennies, and shillings, but they're not always easy to come by, and you quickly realize you're bad at bargaining. The merchant smirks, and you've just traded away 3 eggs for what amounts to 1 limp carrot. Historians still argue whether Tudor markets leaned more heavily on cash or barter in rural areas, but either way, you're clearly losing. It's not just food, though. Blacksmiths show off tools and nails, potters display glazed jugs, and herbalists sell mysterious bundles that promise to cure fevers, or maybe cause them. Fringe tidbit. Sometimes market stalls even sold fake relics, like a supposed feather from the angel Gabriel or a bone from a saint. You wonder how many people bought them sincerely, hoping for divine luck. Entertainment sneaks into the market, too. A juggler tosses wooden balls high into the air, while a man with a dancing bear draws gasps and laughter. You cringe, because the bear is clearly chained and prodded with a stick, but the crowd loves it. Children swarm to a puppet show, cackling as little wooden figures knock each other about. And if you wander too far into a side alley, you might stumble into something less savory. Gambling games, dice rattling in a cup, and suspicious eyes sizing you up. The market also doubles as news central. Town criers announce royal decrees or tax changes. You overhear gossip about ships bringing exotic goods from the New World: sugar, tobacco, even strange beans called cacao that could be drunk hot. Joke number 2. Someone describes it as bitter, dark, and invigorating, and you realize they've just invented Tudor espresso. Crowds press thickly, and it's here that you learn another Tudor reality. Thieves thrive in markets. Purses dangle from belts, and nimble fingers slip coins away with practiced ease. You clutch your basket tighter, trying to look poor enough not to bother with, but a man still bumps your shoulder hard, and you can't help patting your side to make sure you still have your eggs. Religion seeps into the scene too. A priest strolls through, reminding everyone to attend Sunday service. Church processions sometimes thread through markets, mixing sacred with profane, and you notice a few stalls selling wax votive figures, little models of arms, legs, or hearts meant to be offered at shrines for healing prayers. But perhaps the most unnerving part is justice. A set of stocks sits right at the edge of the square. Today, a man is locked in, his face smeared with rotten vegetables thrown by passers-by. His crime? Overcharging for ale. Historians still argue whether punishments like this were more about justice or public spectacle. But either way, you feel uneasy watching. A child pelts him with an onion, giggling, and you realize this isn't just punishment, it's entertainment. As the day stretches, you feel the exhaustion creep in. The constant shouting grates on your ears. You try to haggle for a little bread, but the seller laughs at your soft hands and city accent. Someone else jostles you into a puddle, splattering mud all over your hose. By the time you finally buy something edible, a lump of cheese and a bruised apple, you're more than ready to flee back to the quiet of the countryside. Still, a strange energy lingers in you. The market is overwhelming, yes, but it's also alive. Ideas, goods, and rumors all cross paths here. This is where peasants brush shoulders with merchants, where foreign goods slip into local lives, where laws and gossip travel faster than you thought possible. It's messy, it's noisy, it's unfair, and it's the beating heart of Tudor society. Joke number 3. You stagger away with your tiny bundle of food, only to realize the chicken you came with is gone. Somewhere out there, a thief is roasting your dinner, and you're left with cheese, an apple, and the sinking realization you'd never survive Amazon's free returns policy in Tudor Britain. By the time you trudge back to your straw bed, your ears are ringing, your basket is lighter, and your heart is thudding from the chaos. Surviving one Tudor market day is an achievement, but you can already feel the weight of another sunrise pulling you back into the grind tomorrow. You wake sore and stiff, your body aching from yesterday's market mayhem, but there's no time to rest. Today brings you face to face with the Tudor Church, the spiritual giant that looms over every village, town, and even your own conscience. The church bells ring out in a steady, commanding rhythm, pulling people from their homes like magnets. You follow the tide, trudging along with everyone else, because in Tudor Britain, skipping church isn't just rude, it's suspicious, even dangerous. The church itself is massive compared to the cottages you're used to. Cold stone walls, tall arched windows, flickering candlelight. It's designed to make you feel small. And you do. The smell of incense mixes with the earthy scent of damp stone, and too many people crammed together. You shuffle in, trying not to look lost, and end up kneeling awkwardly on the hard wooden pews. Joke number 1. You think about how you used to complain about uncomfortable theater seats. These make you wish for popcorn and a cushion. The priest stands before the congregation in richly colored vestments, speaking Latin for long stretches. You catch only fragments, but everyone else bows and murmurs with deep familiarity. And here's your first shock. Depending on whether you've landed before or after Henry VIII's break with Rome, this entire ritual could be Catholic or Protestant. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers fully understood these religious shifts, or simply went along with whatever monarch ordered. Either way, you're swept into it. Sermons are long, often moralizing, and full of warnings about sin. The priest reminds you to avoid gluttony, lust, sloth, pretty much all the fun stuff. But religion isn't just about worship here. It controls the calendar itself. Feasts, holy days, and fasts dictate when you can eat meat, when you can marry, even when you can bury the dead. There's also a financial angle. The collection plate comes around, and you're expected to give, even if your purse is nearly empty. Then there are tithes, a tenth of everything you grow or earn owed to the church. Imagine handing over every 10th egg or every 10th carrot and watching it vanish into the priest's granary. Joke number 2. You suddenly appreciate modern taxes. You may grumble about them, but at least the government doesn't show up asking for a tenth of your sandwich. Religion weaves into every corner of life, from superstition to daily habit. You hear whispers about charms hung above doors to ward off witches, or about special holy wells said to cure blindness. Some villagers carry tiny relics or rosary beads as protection, even when such things fall out of official favor. A quirky tidbit. People sometimes believed sneezing during church was a sign of the devil trying to escape your body, which makes you terrified of your tickling nose. The churchyard outside is its own world. Graves crowd the ground, some marked with crosses, others with nothing at all. Children play among them while adults gossip. Funerals and weddings happen here too, often followed by feasts, ale, and, if you're lucky, a chance to snag some roast meat. Inside the church, stained glass windows tell stories, though not everyone can read them the same way. The bright colors mesmerize you, showing saints battling demons or Christ on the cross. But for many, it's as much instruction as decoration. Religion isn't only comfort, though. It's also control. You overhear villagers muttering about a neighbor accused of not attending church, or worse, whispering suspicious ideas. That's dangerous, because in the Tudor world, heresy could mean prison, torture, even burning at the stake. Historians still debate how often ordinary people truly feared persecution, but one thing is clear. The line between belief and survival is razor thin. You notice the church also doubles as a kind of community hub. Announcements are made here, weddings posted, contracts sworn, disputes settled under the watchful eyes of saints. If someone's accused of cheating in trade, the priest might step in. And here's the irony. This sacred space is also where gossip flows thickest. Nothing spreads faster than whispered rumors exchanged after Mass. As the service drags on, your knees ache, your stomach rumbles from fasting, and your mind wanders. You can't help but think, how did people endure this week after week, year after year? Joke number 3. You imagine if Tudor folks had smartphones, everyone would be scrolling during the sermon, trying to look pious while secretly checking sheep prices. When the bells finally ring again, signaling the end, relief sweeps over you. You step outside, blinking against the daylight, feeling both drained and oddly heavier, as though the weight of sin, tithe, and duty has settled firmly on your shoulders. But there's no escaping it. Whether you're praying, working, marrying, or dying, the church has its hand in it all. You realize that in Tudor Britain, survival isn't just about finding food or avoiding plague. It's also about keeping your faith, or at least pretending convincingly enough to keep suspicion away. And as you shuffle home, stomach growling, you can't help thinking, one wrong word, one skipped service, and it wouldn't just be your body at risk, but your very soul, judged by neighbors as much as by God. You wake to a pale Tudor dawn, mist curling across the thatched roofs, and the faint clang of blacksmiths' hammers already echoing through the streets. Today is not about feasting, not about plagues, not even about church sermons. It's about something equally defining, the law. Because in Tudor Britain, you live under rules that can seem both terrifying and bizarre, and you, poor modern traveler, are about to stumble right into them. The first thing you notice is how much law bleeds into daily life. There are sumptuary laws, rules dictating what you can wear based on your rank. You glance down nervously at your clothes. That splash of silk ribbon you tied around your sleeve could get you fined, or worse, accused of pretending to be above your station. Historians still argue whether these laws were strictly enforced or mostly symbolic, but you wouldn't want to test them. Joke number one, imagine a cop pulling you over today for driving a car too fancy for your income bracket. Then there's the legal system itself, a patchwork of local courts, royal decrees, and church authority. You overhear a neighbor whispering about a man hauled before the manor court for letting his pigs run loose in the village. Small crimes, trespassing, brawling, petty theft, are handled locally. Larger ones like murder or treason go to royal courts, where punishments grow more severe. And speaking of treason, you quickly learn that it's the catch-all crime of the age. Speak ill of the monarch, joke about Henry VIII's waistline. Congratulations, you're in mortal danger. You wander through the market and see the stock set up in the square, waiting like silent threats. Misbehave, and you could find yourself locked in, head and hands trapped while neighbors pelt you with rotten vegetables. The idea is humiliation as much as punishment. Children laugh, old women cackle, and everyone takes a shot at throwing turnips. A quirky tidbit. Sometimes, instead of vegetables, people tossed mud, dead cats, or even chamber pots emptied straight onto the offender. You make a mental note, avoid annoying the baker, but not all punishments are so lighthearted. The gallows loom at the edge of town, stark reminders of what happens to thieves or rebels. Hanging is common, though sometimes spared for nobler criminals who might get the privilege of beheading. You shiver as you pass a spot where a quartered body was once displayed, left hanging as a warning. This is not a country where community service exists, unless you count your corpse feeding the crows. Historians still debate how much ordinary people were traumatized or desensitized by these public executions. But one thing's certain, you definitely don't last long here if you've got a loose tongue or sticky fingers. The law also creeps into food and drink. Bread, the very staff of life, is regulated by the assize of bread and ale, which dictates fair prices and quality. If a baker cheats, he could be fined, flogged, or forced to eat his own bad bread. Joke number two. You can't help imagining a modern coffee chain CEO strapped down and forced to drink their own burnt espresso. Religion and law are intertwined too. Skip church and you're fined. Spread heretical ideas and you risk death. Witchcraft accusations lurk in the shadows too. Someone mutters that old Agnes down the lane cursed a cow, and suddenly she's dragged before a judge. Did she really hex the animal? Or did a neighbor just dislike her? Historians still argue whether these trials reflected genuine belief or social scapegoating, but you realize quickly, being poor, female, or just unlucky can land you in a world of trouble. The strangest part? Justice isn't always delivered in ways you'd expect. Trial by jury exists, but with neighbors sitting in judgment, your fate could depend on local grudges. And sometimes guilt or innocence is decided by sheer spectacle. A duel to prove honor, a public confession wrung from torture, or in fringe cases, even the bizarre practice of swimming a witch. Toss her into water. If she floats, she's guilty. If she sinks, well, she's dead, but innocent. Comforting. You sit quietly in the square watching as a petty thief is paraded through town, shackled, the crowd jeering. He'll spend the night in the stocks, then be whipped out of the village. The sight makes your stomach twist. You imagine what little infractions of your own, jaywalking, forgetting to recycle, would have earned you in Tudor Britain. Joke number 3. You chuckle bitterly, thinking that your future here probably involves rotten cabbages hitting your face. The day winds down, but the unease doesn't fade. The Tudor legal system is less about fairness and more about control, hierarchy, and keeping order by fear. You can't shake the sense that no matter what you do, you're always one step away from danger. Whether it's a snitching neighbor, a greedy bailiff, or a monarch in a bad mood. As the sun sets, the stocks cast long shadows, the church bells toll once more, and you realize your journey through Tudor Britain has reached its grim climax. Between plagues, filth, hunger, superstition, and now law and punishment, the conclusion is inescapable. You really wouldn't last a day here. You duck your head beneath a crooked wooden beam and squeeze through the doorway of a Tudor tavern. The night outside is damp and heavy, but in here the air is warm, thick with the stink of ale, roasted meat, and too many bodies packed into one low-ceilinged room. Smoke curls up from rush torches nailed to the walls, stinging your eyes, and you cough as a wave of noise crashes over you. This is no quiet corner pub. This is Tudor nightlife. Raucous, sweaty, scandalous, and just a little bit dangerous. The ale is served in battered pewter mugs, sloshed out of great barrels by a harried serving girl. You barely make it 2 steps inside before someone bumps you, spilling frothy liquid down your sleeve. A man laughs heartily in your face, showing teeth that are more brown than white, and claps you on the shoulder as if you've been friends for years. Welcome to the Tudor Tavern, where personal space is just a modern luxury you'll need to forget. You squeeze between benches, ducking swinging elbows and jugs raised high. On the makeshift stage, a fiddler screeches out a tune while a man with a lute strums with vigor, if not much skill. The crowd joins in with bawdy songs, their lyrics half unintelligible through the haze of drunken laughter. You catch enough words to know the songs are not suitable for children, although, in fairness, there are children here. Some serve food, others scamper between tables fetching scraps. Childhood, in this world, starts early and ends quickly. Now, you probably think a Tudor tavern sounds like harmless fun, a medieval karaoke night. But you probably won't survive long here. Why? Because this is also the breeding ground for scandal, gossip, and brawls that erupt with the flick of a sleeve. If you so much as spill someone's drink, you might find yourself outside in the mud with fists flying before you know what happened. Historians still argue whether taverns truly were schools of vice, as the moralists of the day claimed, or whether they were simply necessary meeting spots for communities. What's certain is that the authorities viewed them with suspicion. Plays were banned in alehouses because they feared subversive speech could flourish over mugs of ale. Imagine a Shakespeare performance cut off midway because some magistrate barges in, shouting about sedition. And oh, the scandals. You overhear one man bragging that he saw Sir Thomas across town keeping company with a woman who was definitely not his wife. Another whispers of smuggled French wine hidden in barrels marked as fish. Taverns were hotbeds for rumors that could ruin reputations or ignite political flames. Remember, this is an age where words could be treason if repeated to the wrong ears. One slip of your tongue, and instead of a hangover tomorrow, you'd be hanging from a rope. At the far end of the room, a wrestling match erupts. Two burly men, already red-faced from drink, shove benches aside and grapple in the straw-strewn dirt floor. The crowd roars approval, slapping the table in rhythm, mugs spilling everywhere. You step back to avoid a splash, only to bump into a toothless old woman clutching a jug. She scowls at you, muttering something about bad luck, and makes a sign with her fingers to ward off evil. A fringe fact for you: many tavern-goers carry charms or believed gestures could protect them from curses or from that dodgy meat pie steaming on the counter. You finally perch at the edge of a bench. The wood is sticky, though you decide not to investigate with your hands. Someone thrusts a plate of food toward you, pork pasties with a suspiciously gray interior. You smile politely and wave it off. After all, you've already risked your life with the water here. You don't need to gamble with undercooked Tudor pork as well. And then the entertainment shifts. The fiddler pauses, replaced by a storyteller who commands silence with a raised hand. He launches into a tale of a ghostly monk haunting the abbey ruins nearby. The crowd gasps at the eerie details, then bursts into laughter as the story twists into something more bawdy. In Tudor culture, fear and humor often walked hand in hand. You lean in, caught between unease and amusement, as the flickering firelight makes the man's shadow loom large on the wall. But before the story's end, a commotion near the doorway pulls everyone's attention. The constable has arrived, stomping in with two assistants. The room falls tense and still. He scans the crowd, clearly looking for someone specific. You suddenly realize how precarious your own position is. You're not just a tourist here. You're a stranger with no papers, no known master, no proof of lawful work. In this world, that makes you suspicious by default. Someone mutters about an illegal dice game in the corner. Others nervously shuffle, hoping the constable doesn't notice their contraband. The serving girl hides a flask beneath her apron. A joke drifts through your mind. This feels less like a casual pub night and more like a Tudor episode of Cops. "Sir, do you know why we pulled you over? Because your ruff is way too big." The constable eventually hauls away a thin man protesting loudly, accused of theft. The crowd returns to its noise, shrugging off the intrusion as though this were routine, which, of course, it was. Law enforcement in Tudor times was as much about spectacle as about justice. You breathe a little easier, glad the suspicious eyes didn't land on you. As the night stretches on, songs grow louder, drinks sloppier, and tempers shorter. A young apprentice stands on the table dancing to laughter before tumbling straight into a pitcher of ale. His master yells at him, threatening punishment at dawn. Somewhere near the fire, a couple attempts discreet kisses, though the lack of candlelight discretion makes them the subject of roaring jokes. This place is chaotic, but it is also the beating heart of Tudor social life. Messy, scandalous, but necessary for people craving escape from the grind of survival. Finally, your head spinning with smoke, song, and the sheer volume of human bodies, you step back outside. The night air feels sharp and cool against your face, washing away the tavern's stink. Behind you, the noise rumbles on, spilling through the door like a wave. Ahead, the streets stretch dark and uncertain. You know this much. You've survived your first Tudor night out, but only barely. And tomorrow, this world will demand even more from you. The tavern fades behind you as the cold night presses in, but your thoughts linger on the laughter, gossip, and musics. For a moment, you almost felt like one of them. Yet tomorrow brings something far trickier than blending into a rowdy drinking crowd. Tomorrow, you'll need to navigate the strange, rule-bound dance of Tudor romance. You wake to the pale light of dawn filtering through shuttered windows. Outside, the bells of a nearby church toll, reminding everyone that another day of labor and order has begun. As you step into the streets, you notice young men and women gathered at market stalls. At first glance, they might look like ordinary shoppers, trading for bread, fish, or cloth. But look again. Eyes dart, cheeks flush, and hands linger longer than they should when passing coins. You've stumbled into the subtle theater of Tudor courtship. Here's the thing. In Tudor England, marriage was rarely about love. Families treated it more like a business contract than a romantic adventure. For wealthy families, marriage meant alliances, land deals, or social advancement. For ordinary folk, it meant survival, combining labor and resources to make life bearable. The idea of marrying purely for passion, that was more the stuff of plays and poetry than real life. But that didn't stop young people from trying. A girl might drop her glove or handkerchief in front of a boy she liked, watching to see if he picked it up. A boy might find excuses to linger near a girl's family stall, offering small gifts, an apple, a ribbon, a sweet. If she accepted, it was a sign. If she ignored him, well, better luck next market day. You notice a young man across the square adjusting his cap nervously. He takes a few steps toward a girl balancing a basket of eggs, mutters something, and she laughs softly. You almost smile, until you see her mother swoop in, eyes sharp as daggers. Courtship here isn't private. It's policed by parents, neighbors, and sometimes even the parish priest. After all, reputation was everything. A whisper of impropriety could destroy a girl's chances of marriage, and by extension, her family's prospects. Fringe fact. Some villages had curious customs for matchmaking. In parts of England on Valentine's Day, young people drew names from a box to determine their Valentine for the year, often leading to both amusement and scandal. In other areas, courtship games involved riddles, singing contests, or even tests of physical strength. Love, it seemed, was never left entirely to chance. You wander farther into the marketplace when an older woman grabs your sleeve. She peers at you with knowing eyes and declares, "You're not wed, are you?" Before you can answer, she rattles off a stream of advice about finding a spouse, peppered with suspicious offers to introduce you to her niece. You stammer something about being already promised and slip away, realizing that marriage here is everyone's business. And then you remember the darker side of these rules. While love matches did happen, a girl could be married off at 12 with her parents' consent, though consummation was generally expected later. Many had little choice in who they wed, especially among the lower classes, where poverty made options slim. And if things went badly, well, divorce was nearly impossible. King Henry VIII may have broken from Rome to secure his annulment, but ordinary people had no such luxury. A jester's thought crosses your mind. Imagine living in a world where you couldn't just break up by changing your relationship status online. No, here you're bound for life, even if your partner snores like a thunderstorm and smells worse than the fishmonger's stall. As you continue walking, you pass a group of apprentices gathered near the church wall. They're singing a playful song about love, their voices cracked but cheerful. One boy suddenly steps forward, kneels dramatically before a girl carrying a pitcher, and declares her beauty brighter than the May sun. The crowd hoots with laughter as she hides her face, though you notice she doesn't seem displeased. Flirting, it seems, can survive even the strictest rules. But just as you're starting to enjoy the light-hearted spectacle, a stern-faced constable approaches. The apprentices scatter, the girl hurries away, and silence falls. Once again, you're reminded of how fragile joy is in this world. A wrong look, a poorly timed word, and what begins as innocent fun can spiral into scandal, or worse, punishment. As the market thins and shadows lengthen, you reflect on the careful choreography of Tudor courtship. It is a game of signals and silences, of watching and waiting, where every gesture carries weight. Love, in this world, is not private. It is public, performative, and dangerous. And yet, despite the rules, the gossip, and the ever-present threat of scandal, the human heart finds ways to reach across the barriers. A smile shared, a hand brushed, a word whispered against the backdrop of bells. You walk on, wondering, in a time where choice is scarce and rules suffocate, is love a luxury or a rebellion? The church bells still echo faintly as you wander beyond the marketplace, where the noise of haggling fades into the chatter of children at play. Their laughter is thin, fleeting, almost startling in this harsh world. You stop for a moment, watching a group of boys chasing a hoop with sticks, while a smaller girl cradles a rag doll stitched from scraps of cloth. It's a glimpse into Tudor childhood, and suddenly you're reminded. If you had been born here, your story would have started much earlier, and probably much harder. From the moment you drew your first breath, your fate was mapped by your family's station. If you were poor, and most people were, your childhood would be short. At 5 or 6, you'd already be put to work, scaring birds from fields, carrying water, tending animals, or helping with weaving. Playtime existed, yes, but it was squeezed between chores, wooden toys, leather balls, and simple games like blind man's bluff or knucklebones offered moments of joy. And if you were lucky enough to survive to 10, you were already considered useful. Childhood as we know it today, a bubble of innocence, simply didn't exist. Still, children found ways to create their own worlds. They sang rhymes, played at mock weddings, and even acted out coronations, imitating the pomp they glimpsed from a distance. Fringe detail, some rural villages had odd traditions where children paraded animals dressed in scraps of cloth during festivals, a strange mix of play and ritual. Imagine a goat in a ruffled collar leading a procession of giggling kids, but laughter was only half the story. Infant mortality was staggering. Some historians estimate nearly 1 in 4 Tudor babies didn't survive their first year. Illnesses like measles, smallpox, or simple fevers swept through towns unchecked. Parents loved their children, of course, but they often carried grief close to their hearts, aware that any child's life could be snatched away without warning. Historians still argue whether this made Tudor parents emotionally distant or simply more resilient. Did they steel themselves against loss, or did they pour more affection into the fleeting years they had? If you had been born to wealth, your experience would look different. Noble children were dressed in miniature versions of adult clothing, trained early in manners and surrounded by tutors. Boys learned Latin, scripture, and arithmetic, preparing for roles in law or court. Girls were schooled in music, needlework, and household management, groomed to become desirable brides. By the age of 12, many noble children were sent to live in other households, serving as wards or companions to powerful families. It was education, networking, and subtle political maneuvering all rolled into one. Your eyes drift to a boy tugging at his mother's sleeve, begging for bread. He can't be more than 8, yet his face is sharp with hunger. If you were him, you'd already know the value of every crumb. You'd also know that misbehavior didn't end with a scolding. Discipline here was strict, often physical, whether at home or in the parish school. Spare the rod, spoil the child wasn't a metaphor. It was daily reality. One curious quirk of Tudor childhood: many children were swaddled tightly in cloth during their earliest months, almost like little mummies. People believed it helped bones grow straight. Babies were rocked in wooden cradles, soothed with lullabies still recognizable in modern tune. And yes, they even had something akin to pacifiers, bits of bread soaked in honey, though whether that was comforting or a fast track to tooth decay is up for debate. You overhear a group of children chanting a rhyme as they skip along the dusty street. Their words sound odd yet familiar, echoes of games that survived centuries. You smile briefly, realizing that even in a world of plague and poverty, play is stubborn, refusing to be extinguished. But then your smile fades as you notice the smallest child stumble, his cough harsh and persistent. In Tudor Britain, sickness stalked the young relentlessly, and there were no vaccines, no antibiotics, no safety nets. Some remedies were harmless, like chamomile teas or lavender charms. Others were bizarre, like wearing a frog's leg in a pouch to cure whooping cough. Parents clung to hope wherever they could find it, and education. For the poor, it was rare. Most children grew up illiterate, their knowledge shaped by oral stories, church sermons, and hands-on labor. A handful of grammar schools offered more, but only if your family could spare you from work. For nobles, though, learning was part of identity. Your handwriting, your Latin grammar, your ability to recite scripture could determine your future. Still, scholars argue just how educated Tudor elites really were, since much of their training was about status, not scholarship. A boy's laughter rings out as he balances on a barrel, arms flailing wildly before tumbling into the mud. His friends roar with amusement, and you can't help but chuckle softly. Childhood here may have been short, but moments of joy broke through like sunlight through clouds. Yet, beneath that laughter lies a truth you can't ignore. If you had been born here, the odds were against you. Survival wasn't guaranteed. Childhood wasn't a sheltered chapter of life, but a fragile sprint toward the responsibilities of adulthood. You walk on, the sound of children's games fading behind you. A part of you aches, imagining what it would be like to grow up in this world, never quite free to be a child, always shadowed by hunger, duty, and danger. And yet somehow the resilience of those small voices reminds you that even in Tudor Britain, life found ways to laugh. The echo of children's laughter fades as you drift toward the town square, where a darker spectacle awaits. A crowd gathers, restless and eager, not for entertainment in the way you might think of it, no concerts, no films, but for justice, Tudor style. And if there's one thing you learn quickly in this world, it's that the law is both everywhere and terrifyingly uneven. Picture this. You accidentally steal a loaf of bread. Maybe you were hungry, maybe it was a mistake. In Tudor England, the response isn't a quiet slap on the wrist. Theft, even petty theft, could mean time in the stocks, a public whipping, or worse. The law was less about rehabilitation and more about setting an example, reminding everyone else in the square what would happen if they stepped out of line. Stocks and pillories are everywhere. Wooden frames with holes clamp your head and hands, leaving you exposed to the jeers of neighbors who might throw rotten eggs, mud, or worse. Some records mention people getting their ears nailed to the pillory as an extra humiliation. And yes, you'd have to tear yourself free. That's a grim way to do your time. Then there's the infamous ducking stool, mostly reserved for women accused of scolding, gossiping, or witchcraft. It involved being strapped into a chair and dunked repeatedly into a pond or river. The goal? Public shaming, with the added risk of drowning if the crowd got too carried away. Fringe fact. Some towns even turned duckings into local events, with food vendors and musicians on the sidelines. Nothing like grabbing a meat pie while someone gasps for air in the river. If you wander further, you see gallows looming like a warning finger pointing at the sky. Execution is the ultimate punishment, and Tudor justice loved to make a spectacle of it. Hanging was common for ordinary criminals, while nobles might be granted the privilege of beheading. Historians still argue whether Henry VIII's execution of his wives was an act of cold pragmatism or a theatrical warning to all who dared cross him. Either way, the message was clear. Loyalty was conditional, and the axe was always sharp. One curious legal tidbit: animals could be put on trial. Yes, you heard that right. Pigs, goats, even dogs sometimes faced court if they harmed a person. There are cases where pigs were dressed in tiny clothes for their execution. Equal parts tragic and bizarre. Imagine standing next to a pig in a doublet, both awaiting your verdict. Treason, though, was the crime everyone feared. Even whispering a joke about the king could land you in trouble. Spies and informants prowled taverns, ready to report loose tongues. And punishment for treason? The dreaded hanging, drawing, and quartering, a gruesome performance where the body was made into a warning sign. Luckily, as a stranger just trying to survive, you probably wouldn't be accused of plotting against the crown. But then again, in an age of paranoia, who knows? Inside local courts, justice was quick and brutal. Juries weren't 12 impartial strangers, but often your neighbors, who might already hold grudges. Evidence was flimsy, sometimes a single witness, sometimes gossip. And torture, though not an everyday practice, lurked in the background. Thumbscrews, the rack, and the scavenger's daughter, a metal frame that crushed the body, were designed to squeeze out confessions. Whether those confessions were true or not? Well, historians still debate how much truth Tudor torture really uncovered. Religion wrapped itself tightly around law. Missing church could mean a fine, repeated absence might hint at heresy. The church courts oversaw everything from marriage disputes to drunkenness, and their punishments were often humiliating, like standing barefoot in a white sheet during service, confessing your sins aloud while everyone stared. You think awkward school presentations are bad? Try baring your soul to the whole parish. But law wasn't only punishment, it was also a tool of control. Enclosure laws pushed peasants off common lands, sparking riots. The Vagrancy Acts branded the homeless as criminals, often literally branding a V into their skin. If you didn't have steady work, you weren't just poor. You were suspicious, someone who could be whipped or enslaved for idleness. You pass a man shackled at the waist, his back streaked with fresh lashes. His crime: speaking out against the local landowner. His punishment is a living billboard. And as you glance away, you realize you wouldn't last a day under this kind of scrutiny. One sarcastic joke, one grumble about the crown, and you'd be dragged into the square to face the crowd. Still, there were cracks in this harsh system. Some communities showed mercy, especially when survival hung in the balance. A stolen loaf might earn forgiveness if neighbors vouched for you. Certain towns practiced benefit of clergy, letting offenders who could read a passage of the Bible escape harsher sentences, basically a medieval literacy test for survival. As you edge away from the square, the smell of sweat and fear lingers. You can't shake the image of the gallows, that ever-present silhouette against the Tudor sky. Law here isn't a safety net, it's a trap waiting for you to stumble. And in a world where survival is already a daily gamble, one slip could be the end. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer fades into the background as your ears catch something far livelier: fiddles, drums, and voices raised in song. For a moment, you forget the gallows, because now you've stumbled into a Tudor festival day. And here's the surprising truth. Despite the hardships, the disease, and the heavy hand of the law, Tudor England also knew how to throw a good party. The year is peppered with feast days, holy days, and village revels. In fact, it's estimated that the average Tudor peasant got close to 100 days off work per year thanks to the church calendar. Not paid vacation in the modern sense, of course, but enforced rest tied to religion. You'd probably appreciate that after a week of plowing fields or slopping pigs. Picture May Day, when green garlands and ribbons cover the village. A tall maypole rises in the center, brightly painted and decorated, and you're encouraged, no, expected, to grab a ribbon and dance until you're dizzy. Historians still argue whether May Day dances had lingering pagan roots or were just excuses to meet new people and flirt. Either way, it was the Tudor version of a dance floor, minus the disco ball. Then there's Shrovetide, the wild festival leading up to Lent. If you think modern pancake breakfasts are tame, imagine street football matches with entire villages charging each other, rules barely existing. The ball might be an inflated pig's bladder, and the goal could be miles away. Injuries are guaranteed, property damages expected, and occasionally someone doesn't make it home at all. Yet the game goes on every year because tradition trumps safety. Christmas in Tudor times was nothing short of spectacular. Forget the single day you're used to. Their celebrations lasted 12 full days. Lords threw feasts, carols filled the air, and homes glowed with candlelight and greenery. And here's a quirky detail. Instead of decorating pine trees, Tudors often used holly, ivy, and even rosemary to bring cheer indoors. Ever eaten a Christmas pie stuffed with all sorts of meats? Sometimes even live birds that would fly out when the crust was cut open? That's the kind of theatrical surprise your Tudor host might spring on you. Music and dancing weren't confined to holidays either. Traveling players performed in village squares, bringing stories and jokes. If you're lucky, you might catch a group of mummers, masked performers, acting out morality plays with exaggerated gestures. To you, it might seem like a mashup of street theater and Halloween. But for the Tudors, it was both entertainment and a way to reinforce moral lessons. Not every celebration was so jolly. Some feast days had a streak of controlled chaos, where roles reversed and common folk mocked their betters. The Lord of Misrule, a figure chosen to preside over festivities, could order pranks, dances, and general silliness. Fringe fact, in some accounts, pigs and donkeys were dressed in clerical robes to parody priests. Historians still debate whether these antics were tolerated safety valves for frustration or dangerous cracks in the social order. Food, of course, was the centerpiece of any Tudor holiday. Ale flowed freely, spiced cakes and custards appeared, and for those wealthy enough, roasted swan or peacock made a show-stopping centerpiece. If you're just a village laborer, though, you'd savor rare treats like meat pies, fresh cheese, and maybe even imported oranges if your lord was feeling generous. After months of porridge and bread, festival feasts felt like stepping into another world. But not all festivals were purely about joy. Some were tied directly to the rhythms of survival. Harvest festivals, for instance, where prayers of thanks mixed with drinking and dancing. Fail to celebrate properly, and you might worry the next year's crop would fail. Superstition blurred seamlessly into ritual. A loaf of bread, shaped like a sheaf of wheat, placed on the church altar, was both offering and insurance policy. One less cheerful holiday was Rogation Tide, when villagers walked the boundaries of their parish, beating the ground with sticks to mark territory. Children were sometimes whipped lightly during the process, not out of cruelty, but as a way to imprint the boundaries in their memory. Imagine your geography lessons involving a stick across your back. Educational, but not recommended. If you're not used to constant ritual and celebration, the noise, the press of bodies, and the dizzying mix of church and carnival might overwhelm you. One moment, you're in a solemn procession carrying candles. The next, you're tumbling into a crowd singing bawdy songs. And yes, drinking played a major role in keeping the party going. Ale was safer than water after all, so you can imagine how rowdy things got. What stands out most is how these festivals break the bleak rhythm of Tudor life. Work, hunger, and disease might be constants, but a day of music, laughter, and feasting reminded everyone they were still human. The crown, too, understood the importance of these distractions. Monarchs encouraged grand celebrations, partly to reinforce loyalty, partly because they enjoyed them as much as anyone. As the maypole ribbons flutter and the sound of fiddles swirls around you, you realize how vital these moments of joy are. Without them, the endless grind of Tudor survival would crush even the strongest spirit. You raise a wooden cup of ale, join the circle of dancers, and for one fleeting moment, you almost forget you're out of place in this world. Almost. You wake the next morning, not from a rooster's crow, but from a hacking cough that rattles through the thin wattle and daub walls. Your throat is raw, your head heavy, and suddenly you realize being sick in Tudor England might be more terrifying than facing a gallows crowd. Here, medicine is a blend of herbs, superstition, and just enough barber surgery to make you flinch. The first thing your host does is not call a doctor, but fetches a local wise woman. She carries a pouch of dried plants and a string of charms. She presses your forehead, squints at your tongue, and mutters something about an imbalance of humors. Remember, Tudor medicine still runs on the ancient Greek idea that your body is made of 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and any sickness comes from them being out of whack. Historians still argue whether Tudor healers genuinely believed in the science or just leaned on tradition to reassure patients. She brews you a foul-smelling tea of nettles and wormwood. You drink because you're told to, but honestly, it tastes like punishment. The next suggestion is bleeding. A few leeches on your arm to release excess blood. If you're unlucky, the village barber doubles as surgeon, wielding a knife with the same hand he used to cut beards an hour ago. Sanitation. That's not a word anyone's using yet. Mainstream Tudor fact. Even university-trained physicians prescribe treatments based on astrology. Yes, your horoscope might decide whether it's safe to let blood from your left arm today. If the stars say no, you wait. Imagine phoning a modern doctor and being told Mercury in retrograde means your surgery is postponed. Of course, wealth plays a huge role. Nobles can afford expensive imported spices like cinnamon or saffron, which are thought to have healing powers. They may even hire a royal physician who prescribes ground pearls or powdered gold. You, the humble visitor, get nettles and prayers. Still, both rich and poor face the same grim truth. Survival rates aren't great. A quirky detail you might not expect. Tudors sometimes use live animals in healing rituals. Place a dead pigeon on your head to draw out a headache. Rub a frog on a tooth to ease the pain. Tie a dead mole around your neck to cure a cough. Superstitious, yes, but in a world without antibiotics, desperate measures seemed reasonable. Dentistry deserves its own horror story. Toothaches were rampant thanks to coarse bread that ground grit into gums. The fix? Extraction, often done by the same barber surgeon with rusty pliers. No anesthesia, just ale and the hope you faint quickly. You'd probably rather live with a toothache. Plague, though, is the monster lurking behind every cough. The sweating sickness strikes suddenly. You feel fine in the morning and could be dead by evening. Historians still argue about what disease it truly was. Some suggest a hantavirus, others influenza. What's certain is the fear. If someone in your house catches it, doors might be marked, and neighbors avoid you like you're cursed. You don't get medicine, you get isolation. The church also weighs heavily in healing. Priests recommend confession and prayer, believing sin manifests as disease. Holy relics, like touching a saint's bone, are considered cures. And sometimes, miraculously, people do recover, reinforcing faith that God's hand is involved. Whether you call it coincidence or divine intervention, you'd clutch that relic pretty tightly if your life hung in the balance. One fascinating fringe-leaning tidbit, urine analysis, was considered a reliable diagnostic tool. Physicians carried special flasks, urinals, with a color chart to compare shades. They'd swirl, sniff, and even taste the sample. Imagine explaining to a modern doctor that your Tudor physician sipped your urine before prescribing nettle tea. Charming. Not all is hopeless, though. Herbal knowledge does sometimes work. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, a natural pain reliever, and garlic has antibacterial properties. The wise women and midwives often dismissed by male doctors may have saved more lives than official physicians. It's one of those debates where historians still argue whether folk remedies were undervalued science or dangerous superstition. Midwifery is its own world. If you're a woman, childbirth is one of the most dangerous moments of your life. You're surrounded by female relatives and a midwife who has experience, not formal training. Herbs, warm cloths, whispered prayers, these are your aids. If something goes wrong, there's little anyone can do. For men, you're left outside pacing, powerless to help. The fear of contagion also sparks some strange practices. People carry pomanders, little balls of herbs and spices to sniff when near foul air, believing it wards off sickness. They avoid bathing too often, thinking water opens the pores to disease. Ironically, less washing probably makes the spread worse, but the logic feels sound to them. If you survive long enough to recover from your cough, you realize that every illness here is a gamble. Sometimes you live, sometimes you don't. And often, the treatment hurts more than the disease. But still, you admire the resilience of the Tudors, who keep working, keep praying, and keep hoping despite the odds. You pull your cloak tighter, grateful your fever broke overnight. Tomorrow, the barber may be calling, and you're not sure your courage will last through his pliers. But for now, you breathe in the scent of rosemary and sage hung in the rafters, and you try not to think too much about the leeches still squirming in a jar on the shelf. The next days bring a sudden shift. After the grime of illness and the shadows of village life, you're swept into a very different world, one of silks, velvet, and trumpets. You've stumbled into court life, the dazzling center of Tudor power, where appearances are everything and one wrong step can be fatal. The first thing you notice is the spectacle. Courtiers glide through vast halls lined with tapestries, their clothing heavy with jewels and embroidery. To modern eyes, it looks almost theatrical. But in the 16th century, fashion is politics. Every ruff, every jewel, every puffed sleeve signals wealth and rank. You, in your borrowed wool cloak, might as well be invisible. But invisibility isn't the worst fate. Court is a place where everyone is watching everyone else. Whispers travel faster than music. Gossip is a weapon sharper than any sword. Historian accounts suggest that alliances, betrayals, and even executions often began with casual words at a banquet. One wrong joke, one overheard complaint about the king or queen could spiral into charges of treason. At feasts, you witness displays unlike anything in the villages. Whole roasted peacocks are brought out, feathers reattached so they look alive. Sugar sculptures, called subtleties, tower on tables, shaped like castles, saints, or mythical beasts. These aren't just desserts, they're political statements showing off a host's wealth and power. A single banquet could cost more than a peasant's yearly wage. And of course, everyone eats with their hands, dipping bread into shared sauces. Forks are still a rarity, whispered about as a foreign eccentricity. Music fills every corner. Lutes, shawms, recorders, and voices mingle. Masques and pageants are staged with elaborate costumes. You watch a group of courtiers dressed as mythological gods, each character chosen carefully to flatter or hint at ambition. It feels like theater, but it's also diplomacy. Everyone knows the symbolism, and everyone is decoding it in real time. One surprising Tudor fact: Henry VIII himself composed music, including a piece that still survives today called Pastime with Good Company. Whether he truly wrote it alone or borrowed heavily is debated, but it shows how closely art and politics were entwined. To be a cultured ruler was to be a powerful one. Court is also where science, philosophy, and spectacle mingle. You overhear astrologers consulting the stars to plan royal decisions, alchemists boasting about turning base metals to gold, and physicians debating cures for the sweating sickness. None of it would pass modern tests of logic, but at court, learning is currency. Even the oddest theories might earn you patronage if they amuse the right noble. Religion hangs heavy too. Chapels echo with chants, and every ceremony is steeped in ritual. Whether Catholic or Protestant, depending on which monarch rules at the time you've landed, the court's spiritual display is as political as it is holy. A noble kneeling in the wrong place or refusing a certain prayer risks far more than embarrassment. Amid the grandeur, you feel tension. Many courtiers are in constant financial ruin, spending everything on clothes and gifts to keep up appearances. They gamble fortunes on dice games, hoping for quick wins. You glimpse one man slide a jeweled ring across the table in desperation, his eyes hollow. To survive here, it seems, is to play a never-ending performance, a quirky fringe note. Courtiers sometimes wore tiny ear scoops on their belts, tools for cleaning wax from their ears in public. It was considered part of grooming, along with carrying ornate toothpicks. To modern sensibilities, it's bizarre. Imagine pulling out your earwax tool in front of the Queen. But in Tudor culture, such things showed refinement. And yet, the court isn't only about glitter. There's danger behind every tapestry. You pass a door and hear hushed voices plotting. You glance at a noble smiling too widely at a rival. You remember that Anne Boleyn, once queen herself, danced in these same halls before being dragged to the Tower. The line between power and execution is frighteningly thin. As night falls, the revelry continues. A masque turns into dancing, the hall flickering with torchlight. Your feet ache, your head spins from too much ale, and still the courtiers whirl as if fatigue doesn't exist. For them, exhaustion is weakness, and weakness can be fatal. You retreat to a corner, your wool cloak heavy with sweat. Watching the gold shimmer and hearing the laughter echo, you realize Tudor court life is like a play where the actors never step off stage. Everyone is performing, everyone is vulnerable, and you, the accidental visitor, know that a single misstep could mean the tower gates opening for you. So you keep quiet, you keep your eyes open, and you let the masquerade swirl around you, half in awe, half in fear. Morning light drags you from uneasy sleep, and the court's music has faded into something harsher. The distant roll of drums. Word spreads quickly. There's a muster. Soldiers assembling for the crown's wars. You follow the noise, and suddenly you're standing in the shadow of Tudor military life. The first thing you notice is the clatter of weapons. Men file past with pikes taller than a house beam, swords jangling at their belts, and muskets resting heavy on their shoulders. They don't look like professional soldiers, at least not most of them. Some are farmers pressed into service, wearing patched tunics beneath borrowed armor. Others swagger in fine doublets, showing they bought their commissions. It's a strange mix, an army built from necessity rather than long training. The smell hits next: sweat, tar, and gunpowder residue. You watch a group fumbling with matchlock muskets, struggling to keep the glowing match cord alight in the damp air. The weapons misfire as often as they work, but when they do roar, the crack echoes like thunder. One unlucky man singes his eyebrows when the powder pan flares too soon. Everyone laughs, but you step back quickly, reminded how dangerous these early firearms really are. A captain struts among them, barking orders. His breastplate gleams in the morning sun, polished to a mirror. You catch the Tudor obsession with status even here. Armor isn't just protection, it's a statement. Wealthy men commission elaborate suits engraved with lions, vines, or even biblical scenes, while the poor make do with leather jerkins and battered helmets. Historians still argue whether such ornate armor was practical for combat or mostly ceremonial. But either way, it looks intimidating. Then the training begins. Soldiers thrust pikes in unison, forming a forest of steel points. You're told this is the heart of Tudor battle strategy: dense blocks of pikemen resisting cavalry charges. It looks impressive, but the discipline wavers. A few men are late to step, and the captain cuffs them hard. In war, hesitation means death. You overhear talk of the enemy. Sometimes it's the Scots, sometimes the French, sometimes rebels at home. Tudor England seems perpetually at war, if not on the battlefield, then in spirit. Campaigns abroad are brutal. Supplies run short. Disease sweeps camps, and men desert whenever they can. One soldier mutters about losing half his company to dysentery before they even saw combat. Another brags about capturing a French standard, though you suspect he embellished the tale over ale. The fringe detail that surprises you most is the role of longbows. Though the age of gunpowder is dawning, archers still train, drawing massive bows taller than themselves. The English longbow had been a terror in medieval battles, and even in Tudor times it lingers. Though fewer men can master its strength, archaeologists have found skeletons of longbowmen with permanently deformed shoulders from years of practice. You try pulling one and nearly dislocate your arm. The soldiers chuckle, one joking that you'd be better off throwing rocks. As midday heat grows, the camp shifts to games and wagers. Men roll dice on overturned shields, gamble their rations, and sing bawdy songs. You catch one about a commander's terrible aim, though it's sung softly just in case spies are listening. Humor is a weapon here, too, a way of resisting fear. You're handed a mess of food, salted fish so hard you could use it as a weapon, and bread dense as a brick. Soldiers complain constantly about rations, yet eat every scrap. The ale flows, of course, because water is too risky. One man tells you cheerfully that beer keeps the army moving better than prayers ever could. That evening, you sit by the fire as stories swirl. Some recall the Spanish troops with terror, describing their formations and ruthless discipline. Others talk of raids across the Scottish border where villages burned and livestock were seized as casually as grain. It's sobering, realizing how much of Tudor life was shaped by near-constant conflict. But war isn't only fought with weapons. The camp preacher steps forward, reminding men of divine favor. Battles are framed as holy struggles, victories as signs of God's approval. You notice how soldiers cling to this narrative. It gives meaning to the misery. Historians debate whether ordinary men believed this deeply or simply nodded along. But either way, the sermons roll on, mixing scripture with military orders. A quirky note you overhear. Some soldiers carry tiny pocket saints, small lid or pewter charms of saints believed to protect them in battle. One man kisses his before every drill. Another has stitched a scrap of his wife's dress into his jerkin, swearing it keeps arrows away. Rational or not, these talismans give courage in the chaos. Night falls, and drums echo once more. Torches line the camp, sparks rising into the dark. You realize war in Tudor times isn't just brutal, it's unpredictable. Weapons fail, disease kills more than swords, and loyalty shifts with the wind. For you, survival would be nearly impossible. The court was dangerous, yes, but here a single battle could erase you without trace. So you wrap your thin cloak tighter, listening to the soldiers snore, mutter, and pray. You know tomorrow could mean marching toward blood, mud, and fire. And you also know you wouldn't last a day. The next morning, you barely finish rubbing the sleep from your eyes before a commotion pulls you into the town square. A crowd is gathering, and the energy feels different. Less about drums and muskets, more about judgment. Tudor law has come calling, and you're about to find out just how terrifying it could be. The first thing you notice is the platform, a wooden scaffold raised above the cobblestones. It isn't for speeches, it's for punishment. A man is already chained to the stocks, his head and hands pinned, while children pelt him with rotten vegetables. You wrinkle your nose as a cabbage explodes against his cheek. His crime? Stealing bread. Yes, in Tudor England, hunger often led straight to humiliation. But that's just the beginning. As you edge closer, you hear whispers of far darker sentences. Hanging for theft, burning for heresy, beheading for treason. The Tudors didn't play around when it came to control. Their justice system was as much about spectacle as punishment, designed to terrify everyone watching into obedience. Historians still argue whether these brutal displays truly reduced crime or simply fed a bloodthirsty public. You see it unfold firsthand. A sheriff arrives, parchment in hand, reading aloud a sentence. The accused, a trembling young woman, is convicted of witchcraft. The charge? A neighbor's cow fell ill, and she muttered something about curses. In our world, it sounds absurd, but here, suspicion alone can ruin lives. People lean in, muttering prayers or spitting in disgust. Superstition grips the air like smoke. The mainstream fact hits you hard. Under Henry VIII and later monarchs, execution became common. Thousands died for religious reasons alone. Deny the king's supremacy, side with the pope, or question a monarch's marriage, and you might meet the axe. The Tower of London, in particular, was a conveyor belt of noble blood. Anne Boleyn, Thomas More, Lady Jane Grey. You remember hearing about them, but standing here, the blade's shadow feels much closer. A soldier beside you smirks and says, "Hangings make the best markets." You frown, confused, until you realize what he means. Public executions weren't just justice, they were entertainment. Families packed lunches, vendors sold pies, and people cheered. Grim as it seems, it was their version of a weekend festival. A fringe tidbit, you learn? Sometimes executioners sold souvenirs, chunks of rope or drops of blood on cloth, morbid collectibles that gave people a piece of history, or so they thought. You glance around and notice something odd. Some punishments are almost playful. For petty gossiping, women might be forced into the scold's bridle. A cruel metal cage fitted around the head with a tongue plate to stop speech. Imagine a medieval muzzle, but for your words. Others might be dunked in rivers on a cucking stool, splashing helplessly while townsfolk laughed. It's part humiliation, part torture, and you realize no crime is too small to escape the theater of punishment. You feel your pulse quicken when a pair of guards drag a man forward. He's accused of treason, and that means the full horror show. Hanging, drawing, and quartering. You shudder as the sheriff describes the process. Hanging until nearly dead. Disembowelment. Then limbs hacked apart. Thankfully, you don't witness it all today, but just hearing the words is enough. The Tudors believed terror maintained order, and judging by the silence of the crowd, they weren't wrong. But not everything was so black and white. You hear of benefit of clergy, a loophole where literate people, often clergy or nobles, could escape harsher sentences by reciting a verse from the Bible. This legal cheat saved lives, though commoners rarely got the chance. Historians debate whether the system was ever truly fair or whether it existed mainly to protect elites. As you edge away from the scaffold, you stumble upon another quirk. The pillory isn't just for food throwing. Sometimes offenders had their ears nailed to the wood. When released, they had to rip themselves free. A gruesome mark that branded them forever as criminals. You swallow hard, realizing your thin skin would never endure such cruelty. The crowd begins to disperse, some laughing, others solemn. You overhear talk about the infamous Bloody Code, a system that eventually listed hundreds of capital crimes. Pickpocketing? Hangable. Cutting down a tree? Sometimes hangable too. The Tudors didn't invent it all, but they paved the way for a culture where the smallest slip could mean death. One old man beside you leans on his stick and mutters, "Best to keep your head down, best to say nothing at all." You nod, wishing you could melt into the cobblestones. Here, survival isn't about bravery. It's about silence, obedience, and praying nobody accuses you of witchcraft or sedition. As dusk falls, the scaffold looms in silhouette. You shiver, realizing you're no safer here than on a battlefield. In Tudor England, justice doesn't protect, it intimidates. And you, with your 21st century sarcasm and loose tongue, wouldn't last a single day. Night rolls in, and with it comes a different kind of danger. You thought the scaffold and stocks were frightening? Wait until you try to walk through Tudor London after dark. The sun sinks behind the crooked rooftops, and the shadows grow teeth. The first thing you notice is the smell. By day, it was pungent enough. Fish guts, dung, smoke. But at night, it's unbearable. The air hangs thick with rot from open sewers, chamber pots emptied directly into the gutters, and slaughterhouses still steaming from the day's work. You try to breathe shallowly, but it doesn't help. The city feels like a beast that exhaled centuries of filth. You glance around for a lantern, but only a few flicker here and there. London streets are mostly unlit, save for the pale moon and a handful of torches. Shadows stretch across the alleys, and you realize how easy it would be to vanish here, swallowed up without a sound. That's not paranoia. Crime thrives in this darkness. Muggers, or cut purses, prowl the streets like wolves. They don't just snatch wallets, they slash them straight off your belt with razor-sharp knives. A brush against your side, a flick of the wrist, and your money pouch is gone. If you're unlucky, they'll take more than coin. Some gangs corner strangers in dead ends, beating them senseless for boots, cloaks, or even buttons. Buttons, by the way, were valuable enough to strip from a body. You tuck your coat tighter and shuffle forward, suddenly aware of every loose seam on your outfit. Then you hear it, the faint twang of a lute drifting from a tavern. Relief? Maybe. But taverns after dark are a gamble. Inside, you'll find ale, firelight, and maybe a friendly round of dice. You'll also find brawls breaking out over insults, spilled drinks, or accusations of cheating. Chairs smash, knives flash, and more than a few poor souls stagger home with cracked skulls. A fringe tidbit you overhear? Sometimes innkeepers paid professional brawlers to start fights. It kept the ale flowing and the customers shouting. You decide to press on, but London's streets twist like a maze. With no grid and few signs, you stumble into lanes that grow narrower, darker, more dangerous. Rats skitter underfoot, feasting on the garbage, bold enough to brush against your ankles. You shiver, remembering that plague is never far from their fleas. Historians still argue whether the Tudors understood the rat connection at all, or if they blamed only foul air, the dreaded miasma. Either way, you're convinced a single scratch in this alley could spell disaster. A sudden shout jolts you. Ahead, a group of watchmen appear carrying halberds and lanterns. Finally, law and order? Not quite. These men are often little better than the criminals they chase. Paid poorly and feared only slightly, they're known to turn a blind eye if you slip them a coin. Some even join in the thieving when the chance arises. If you can't pay, they might accuse you of vagrancy instead, wandering without work, and drag you to jail. You step into the shadows, heart hammering, hoping their lantern light passes without catching your eyes. As you creep deeper, you catch sight of something haunting, the outline of Tyburn gallows looming in the distance, its dark frame silhouetted against the night sky. Tomorrow, there might be an execution there, with thousands gathering to jeer and cheer. For now, it's silent, like a warning whispered from the timber itself. You swallow, wondering how many last breaths linger in the wood grain. The sounds of the city keep shifting. A dog barks, followed by the sharp cry of a woman, maybe a street vendor robbed of her goods, or worse. You pick up the pace, but your shoes splash into a puddle of something foul. Not water. Definitely not water. You mutter a curse under your breath, and in the silence, your voice feels too loud, like you've called attention to yourself. Finally, you stumble upon a row of brothels, lanterns swinging lazily in the wind. Women lean in the doorways, their faces powdered and weary. Brothels were illegal in theory, but in practice, authorities tolerated them, especially if bribes flowed. Syphilis, known then as the Great Pox, spread like wildfire through these quarters. Treatments ranged from mercury ointments to bizarre charms. One odd tidbit? Some people believed carrying a dried toad in their pocket would ward off infection. Spoiler alert, it didn't. You hurry past, your stomach knotting, when a drunk man suddenly lurches from a doorway, grabbing at your sleeve. His breath reeks of ale, his eyes glassy. He slurs something about dice and fortune before a friend drags him back inside. You're rattled, but strangely grateful it wasn't worse. By the time you glimpse the faint glow of your lodging, you're exhausted. Every alley felt like a trap, every noise a threat. You're starting to realize something profound. In Tudor London, night itself was an enemy. Without modern lighting, police, or medicine, survival after sundown depended on luck, money, and the ability to vanish quickly. You collapse inside, pulling the shutters tight, your ears still ringing with distant shouts and tavern songs. The city hasn't slept in centuries, and it won't tonight either. And you? You know you barely survived a single walk down its streets. By dawn, you've decided you need a change of pace. The gallows, the brawls, the stink of Tudor nights, it's all been heavy on your heart. And then, like a gift, you hear it. The sound of music rising from a courtyard nearby, lutes twang, shawms bleat, and a deep drumbeat shakes through the morning air. For the first time in days, your step feels lighter. You follow the noise until you find yourself swept into a square where musicians play and dancers whirl. Their costumes are bright, their shoes stamping in rhythm, their faces flushed with laughter. You stand at the edge, watching. In Tudor England, music isn't just entertainment, it's survival. Songs lift spirits during work, soothe weary souls in taverns, and celebrate every feast and holy day. Even kings and queens use music to broadcast power. Henry VIII himself, you learn, was a composer. He wrote love songs and religious hymns, boasting that no other monarch could rival his talent. Imagine a king strutting about, humming his own tunes, expecting courtiers to praise him like a Tudor rock star. Someone nudges you forward, urging you to join the dance. Before you know it, you're pulled into a circle. The steps are simple: forward, back, spin, and the crowd cheers when you stumble awkwardly trying to keep up. Dancing here is not just joy, it's social glue. To refuse might offend, to falter too often might draw laughter. Still, you notice something striking. Women and men moving together in patterned rows, signaling through every step a subtle language of class and courtship. One historian even suggested that certain dances carried coded flirtations, leaning a little closer, brushing a hand, choosing a partner for a second round. As the music swells, you spot the instruments more clearly. A viol, ancestor of the violin, croons in the hands of a skilled player. A sackbut, an early trombone, slides back and forth, adding brass thunder. And there, near the edge, a boy beats on a tabor drum with sticks, sweat flying from his brow. These instruments didn't come cheap. Owning them marked wealth, and playing them marked education. Still, even poorer folk made do with fiddles, whistles, or clapping hands. Rhythm, after all, costs nothing. The lyrics to the songs shift with the mood. Some are bawdy, filled with cheeky jokes about ale, lovers, and chamber pots. Others are solemn ballads recounting saints' miracles or the grief of war. You're struck by how much oral tradition carries Tudor history. Many can't read, but everyone remembers a tune. If you can sing it, you can keep it alive. Then, as the dancers take a break, someone unrolls a manuscript of musical notation. You squint. It looks oddly modern. 5 lines, notes perched neatly above and below. This is part of the Renaissance shift. Music preserved in ink, not just memory. Wealthy families keep these books to pass down songs. One fringe fact you overhear from a learned bystander: parchment for these books sometimes came from animal skin, so, in a sense, a song could literally be written on the hide of a calf. You shake your head, marveling at the mix of beauty and brutality in Tudor art. After the dancing, the performers turn to something more theatrical. A group of actors sets up a makeshift stage, painted backdrops, crude props, and masks. You realize you're watching the beginnings of what would blossom into England's world-famous theater. No Shakespeare yet. He won't stride in for decades. But morality plays and farces keep audiences roaring. One actor, dressed as the devil with horns and a tail, leaps about with such comic energy that children squeal with delight. Meanwhile, a priest character blunders and fumbles, mocked mercilessly. The Tudors, it seems, love a little irreverence, but distraction always carries an edge. Between dances and jokes, you catch snippets of conversation, fears of foreign invasion, whispers of spies, warnings about disease. Even in laughter, Tudor people can't escape their anxieties. Entertainment isn't just pastime, it's escape, temporary freedom from a hard, uncertain world. As evening falls, the music shifts again. A hush sweeps the crowd as a courtly pavane begins. Couples bow deeply, moving with stately grace. The contrast to the earlier wild stomping startles you. Here is a dance of the elite, slow and controlled, every gesture a statement of discipline and breeding. A nobleman catches your eye, smirking at your clumsy steps, and you shrink back, reminded that entertainment also reveals the walls between classes. Still, for a brief while, you forget the stink of the gutters and the dread of the watchman. You let the rhythm carry you. You imagine being part of a world where music filled not headphones, but streets and halls, binding people together in shared breath and movement. The distraction feels necessary, even holy. When at last the musicians pack their instruments and the dancers scatter, you're left in the quiet square. The echoes of lute strings and drum beats linger in your chest, warm and alive. For once, you aren't afraid of the dark. You've tasted joy, and it has steadied you for what comes next. The next morning, your steps lead you toward the grander quarters of town. Here, houses grow taller, windows larger, and doors framed by carved oak. The air smells faintly of beeswax and herbs, cleaner, richer. You've drifted from the raucous alleys of taverns and dancers into the domain of nobles, merchants, and courtiers. And in this part of Tudor life, spectacle is currency. A murmur draws you down a lane. At the end, a courtyard blazes with color. Pages carry banners, trumpets blare, and ladies in velvet gowns swirl past in procession. You've stumbled into a pageant, a carefully staged event where theater, art, and politics mix seamlessly. A gilded float rolls by, decorated with painted gods and goddesses. A boy in silver cloth pretends to be Mercury, wings bobbing awkwardly as he recites verses about prosperity and loyalty. Laughter ripples through the crowd, but everyone understands. The performance isn't just for fun. It's propaganda, meant to flatter the local lord and remind the people of his wealth. You edge closer. The spectacle grows stranger. Men dressed as wild men, covered in moss and branches, charge around, roaring to frighten children. An enormous papier-mâché dragon appears, its belly filled with fireworks. When it bursts with sparks, the crowd gasps in awe. And you realize Tudor art loves to shock, to overwhelm. It thrives on drama, because drama keeps attention. Later, you duck into a nobleman's hall. Inside, walls glow with paintings and tapestries. One tapestry shows unicorns tangled in a forest, their horns shining like moonlight. Another depicts hunting scenes, stags collapsing beneath spears. These works aren't just decoration, they are stories of power, lineage, and belief. Tapestries kept halls warm, yes, but also reminded every visitor of the master's might. You stare longest at the portraits. Rich men, women, and children gaze back at you, their eyes sharp, their clothing precise. This is the Tudor selfie, posed, controlled, meant to broadcast wealth and virtue. Each detail matters. A string of pearls for purity, a crimson robe for authority, a pet spaniel for loyalty. But one detail makes your stomach twist. A servant explains that painters sometimes exaggerated, softening wrinkles, brightening hair, slimming waists. Even in the 1500s, its image could be crafted, manipulated, perfected. You remember hearing that Hans Holbein the Younger, one of the great Tudor artists, painted King Henry V to look even taller, stronger, and more commanding than he truly was. His portraits became like propaganda posters, terrifying, larger than life. They didn't just show Henry, they created him. People who saw the paintings believed in the myth. In a way, Holbein gave the king his armor of image, more potent than steel. The household you've wandered into prepares for another spectacle, a mask. You're invited, perhaps mistaken for a guest, perhaps just swept in by the bustle. Soon the hall fills with flickering torchlight. Curtains part, revealing dancers in masks shaped like suns and moons. They move in intricate patterns, weaving around each other with calculated grace. Music swells, perfume lingers, silk whispers. The masks carry hidden meanings, virtues triumphing over vices, wisdom guiding the prince, love overcoming strife. But for the audience, the message is secondary to the marvel of sound, color, and movement. At the climax, the masks come off. The performers are revealed to be courtiers themselves. Gasps ripple through the crowd as noble ladies and gentlemen, who seem too lofty for such play, laugh and bow. You realize the mask is also about display. By dancing, nobles prove not only wealth, but also culture, daring, and wit. And yet, beneath all the spectacle, you feel a shadow. The cost of the pageant, the paintings, the masks, all this glitter rests on the backs of laborers who toil, starve, and pay taxes. The grandeur distracts, but it also intimidates. To see such beauty is to remember who rules you and who doesn't. Still, you can't deny the spell. As you step back into the cool night, you carry the glow of torches and painted faces in your mind. You've glimpsed a Tudor world where art wasn't a private indulgence, but a public performance, wielded like a weapon and embraced like a prayer. The next morning, your curiosity draws you to the bustling docks along the Thames, where the air is thick with salt, smoke, and the calls of sailors. Ships from Spain, the Low Countries, and France unload cargoes of cloth, wine, and spices, but also a stream of foreign visitors, merchants, diplomats, and sometimes spies. Tudor England may feel insular, but it is part of a web of international intrigue, and crossing paths with these outsiders can be both enlightening and dangerous. The first thing you notice is the language. French, Flemish, Spanish, and Italian swirl in the air, overlapping like a chaotic choir. Merchants argue over prices with gestures, shouts, and scribbled accounts. A scholar might be intrigued. You're just dizzy. Historians still argue whether Tudor England's exposure to foreign trade fundamentally reshaped its culture or merely enriched the elite. Either way, you see the beginnings of global commerce here, centuries before container ships and air freight. You wander through the market streets behind the docks. Venetian glass catches your eye, delicate as spun sugar. Cloth, dyed with cochineal, imported from the New World, glows a shocking red under the morning sun. You can't afford a thing, but the richness of the goods overwhelms your senses. Fringe detail. Some spices, like saffron or pepper, were worth more than gold per pound. Traders flaunt them openly, the aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg blending with the stench of the river. Among the merchants, diplomats arrive in heavy, elaborate gowns. Their seals, coats of arms, and jeweled chains are symbols of both power and subtle threats. You overhear talk of treaties, marriages, and alliances, but also espionage. Some visitors are not here to trade goods. They're here to gather secrets. English nobles welcome them with bows and smiles, but behind closed doors, minds are calculating, alliances shifting like the tide. You realize that even a casual conversation could be overheard, misinterpreted, or recorded to serve political ends. A quirky scene draws your attention. A Portuguese sailor tries to impress a crowd by performing acrobatics on the deck of a ship, nearly falling into the river. The children scream, the adults laugh, and you're reminded that Tudor foreigners sometimes brought more than trade. They brought entertainment, curiosity, and chaos. In return, locals attempt to mimic their dances or learn foreign phrases, mixing cultures in unexpected ways. Religion lurks in every corner. Some visitors are Catholic envoys, others Protestant refugees. The Queen's spies watch them carefully, assessing loyalties. One minor misstep, a careless word, an embroidered coat depicting a forbidden saint, could land a diplomat in the tower. You marvel at the tension. Diplomacy is performed like a tightrope act, balancing words, gestures, and appearances to survive. Even food shows the foreign influence. You spot almonds, oranges, and olive oil being sold, exotic flavors that most locals rarely taste. A chef in a noble household experiments with Spanish cooking techniques, while French pastries tempt the wealthy elite. Fringe historians still debate whether these culinary imports subtly shifted English tastes or remained confined to courtly indulgence. You sample a small piece of candied peel, wincing at the sharp sweetness, amazed that such things exist. Despite the glamour, danger follows. Foreign visitors could be spies, courtiers disguised as merchants, or simply carriers of disease. Plague often traveled via ships, hiding in rat-infested cargo holds. A single misstep in hygiene, a handshake, or a shared drink could be fatal. You remember your previous brushes with illness and shiver. Survival here requires both curiosity and extreme caution. By evening, the docks grow quieter. Ships bob gently, lanterns casting golden reflections on the water. Sailors sing work songs. Merchants tally the day's profits, and the diplomats retreat to taverns and private chambers. You feel a fleeting connection to the wider world, understanding that Tudor England is far from isolated. Yet the lessons are clear. Curiosity brings knowledge, but exposure to foreign influence also brings risk, sometimes deadly. You step back from the quay, the aroma of spices and the shouts of sailors lingering in your mind. For a brief moment, you glimpse the global stage, the mingling of culture, commerce, and cunning, and you realize, once again, that your modern instincts would be tested beyond endurance here. A misstep, a careless word, or a stolen glance could spell disaster in this world of intrigue, trade, and diplomacy. You step into a small parish church, the door creaking under your hand. The early morning sun slants through stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned mosaics on the cold stone floor. Dust motes drift lazily through the colored light, and you feel the weight of centuries pressing down. In Tudor England, religion isn't just a personal matter. It is political, social, and often lethal. A single misstep, a whispered question, or the wrong gesture could land you in a cell, or worse, the priest stands at the pulpit, robes heavy with gold trim and embroidered crosses. His voice reverberates through the halls he recites scripture, alternately comforting, commanding, and warning. You notice the congregation is split between nodding piously, fidgeting nervously, and whispering to one another. England has broken from Rome. Henry VIII declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and loyalty to the crown now dictates your faith. Catholics, Protestants, and those trying to straddle both worlds tread a dangerous line. Historians still argue whether the Reformation was primarily political or theological. But here, survival is not a theoretical question. Your eyes scan the altar. It is a peculiar mixture of old and new. Statues of saints have been removed or defaced, yet carved wood and gilded chalices remain. Fringe fact, some families secretly hide relics, tiny bones, small paintings or charms, behind wall panels or under floorboards. They carry these sacred objects in defiance of the crown, preserving private devotion in the shadows. You imagine the risk, a misplaced glance by a parish constable, and faith could become a crime. Hymn singing begins, filling the vaulted space with solemn resonance. The sound is beautiful, almost hypnotic, but there is an underlying tension. Mispronounce a word, hum the wrong note, or forget a verse, and your error could be noted, remembered, and later punished. Literacy itself has become a political tool. Those who can read might gain advantage, but also attract scrutiny. Outside, pamphleteers distribute tracts on predestination, transubstantiation, and the correct forms of worship. Fringe historians suggest that some pamphlets served as coded messages for espionage or rebellion, turning printed words into weapons. Pilgrims pass through the streets in groups, banners fluttering in the wind. Nobles ride in ornate carriages, servants in their shadow, while peasants walk barefoot with hands clasping charms or rosaries. Some visit wells or shrines, hoping for miraculous cures, while others perform prayers for protection or fortune. Superstition mingles seamlessly with faith. You notice subtle hierarchy in the rituals. Who kneels first? Who touches the relic? Who gets the closest blessing? Even devotion becomes a performance, signaling piety, loyalty, or social status. The enforcement of religious conformity is ever present. Parish constables patrol neighborhoods, watching for those attending forbidden masses or refusing communion. Royal agents observe for loyalty to the crown's new church. A single misstep, a whispered prayer to a saint, a secret Catholic ritual, could end with imprisonment or execution. You recall the gallows from Section 24, the stocks from Section 25, and a shiver travels down your spine. Here, even spiritual choices carry mortal consequences. Fringe practices abound in secret. Families conceal crucifixes, rosaries, and prayer books under floorboards or behind false panels, teaching children to worship quietly. Some wear charms beneath clothing to ward off evil or the king's spies. Scholars still debate how widespread these clandestine practices were, whether mere superstition or deliberate subversion. Either way, the ingenuity and caution required are staggering. Survival depends not only on belief, but on discretion memory, and the ability to feign conformity when needed. You observe a heated debate outside the church. Two men argue over predestination, gesturing wildly, while a woman counters with the story about a miracle she witnessed at a shrine. Religion saturates every aspect of Tudor life, from marketplaces and taverns to the drawing rooms of nobles. You step carefully, listening to murmurs, observing gestures, realizing that even a seemingly trivial action, crossing yourself incorrectly, kneeling at the wrong moment, could attract suspicion. By late afternoon, the sunlight dims, filtering through the high windows, and the church empties gradually. You linger, letting the quiet sink in, feeling both awe and dread. Faith here is a living, breathing system entwined with law, power, and social survival. It is never purely spiritual. It demands constant vigilance, careful choices, and an understanding of who watches, who judges, and who decides your fate. As you step back into the streets, the intensity follows you. Market sellers speak in hushed tones about banned masses. Travelers whisper of spies and secret rituals, and banners flap in the wind proclaiming loyalty to the crown. You realize that Tudor England requires mastery of both devotion and deception. To navigate these streets, you must pray, observe, and survive all at once. One slip of tongue or gesture, and the line between pious citizen and condemned heretic vanishes. Every sound, movement, and symbol carries meaning. The Reformation is not just history, it is daily life, survival, and performance. You inhale deeply, letting the scents of incense, burning tallow, and damp stone fill your lungs, and you understand. In this world, religion is a skill, a strategy, and a constant test. Only those who respect its power and respect its danger can hope to last a day. The day winds down, and the city takes a deep, uneven breath. Streets grow quieter, but the distant murmur of the Thames reminds you that Tudor London never truly sleeps. Lanterns flicker along alleys, fires burn low in taverns, and the occasional shout from a late-night wanderer punctuates the hush. You find a small chamber tucked behind a shuttered inn, its walls thick enough to block most of the city's clamor. You sink onto the cold wooden floor, letting the day's sights, sounds, and smells wash over you. Think of the pageants in the square, the dancers' laughter echoing in sunlit courtyards, and the delicate, shimmering tapestries in noble halls. Remember the foreign ships docked on the Thames, their sails bright against the morning sky, spices clinging to the wind, the voices of merchants and diplomats weaving a chaotic chorus. Let your mind linger on the colorful chaos of the market, the dramatic music of street performers, and the careful, deadly politicking behind every bow and curtsy. Religion presses on your thoughts next. You recall the rich colored light streaming through church windows, the solemn voices of hymn singers, the whispers of hidden relics tucked into walls, the secret devotion that allowed families to survive while avoiding the watchful eyes of the crown. The Reformation was not just doctrine. It was a matter of life, and its weight rested on every decision, every word spoken, every gesture performed. The streets outside dim further, shadows stretching like slow, silent tides. You remember the smells and dangers of the alleys at night, the dung, the rats, the hidden criminals, and you shiver, grateful for your safe perch. Even so, the lessons linger. Tudor life demanded constant awareness, adaptability, and a careful dance between courage and caution. Survival was a skill honed every day. You close your eyes and picture the city from above. The sound of lute music, the roar of pageant crowds, the chatter of foreign traders, the solemn hum of churches all blend together into a tapestry of human life. You allow yourself to drift through it, detached but connected, observing the rhythms and patterns that allowed ordinary people to live, work, and sometimes even laugh amid danger and uncertainty. Finally, you breathe deeply, letting the city's complexity soften into a calm hum. Remember the ingenuity, humor, and resilience of those who navigated this world without modern conveniences, protections, or medicine. Let the day's images fade like candlelight, slowly, softly. You are safe now, watching history unfold only in your imagination, not on cobblestones slick with rain or in alleys teeming with peril. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the memory of Tudor England drift away like smoke over the Thames. Feel your muscles relax, your mind ease, and let sleep take you gently, carrying with it the vivid, terrifying, and beautiful world you've just explored.